doesn't mean something to you.
Oh yeah, no, that's
okay,
huge.
That's a big one,
yes.
I was just like, I don't know what this means.
It's sort of a Glencore, Gunvor, Trafigura, Vitol, like those kind of guys. Glencore's a little different, but those kind of guys. All right, you're also looking at onsemi. What's going on there?
Yeah, so we're seeing shares surging as much as 13%. That's the most since 2022. And this is coming after it saw second quarter results that were pretty strong. We're hearing analysts really flagging the stock. They're saying that third quarter guidance was mixed, but the results that we got from the second quarter were pretty strong. But they are looking at a gross margin and EPS becoming in above expectations, with revenues and gross margins slightly below, with EPS in line in terms of that third quarter guidance there.
So looking at the stock here, up 12.6% on the day, still down about 5% for the year here. So, but this is, it's interesting. It's a $34 billion market cap stock, but having a big day today.
Very much so.
All right, let's go to Abbott, because that's not so good.
Not looking too hot here. We're seeing shares declining as much as 5% and their worst drop since March. That's on the intraday level. Now, this is coming after the company was ordered by a jury to pay almost $500 million over allegations that it hid the risk that its premature infant formula can cause a potentially fatal bowel disease. And so, of course, this isn't great news when we're looking at it from an investor perspective. We've got BI saying that the verdict could be reduced, though it doesn't have to be. They do think that it's likely to be overturned, but we're really watching this, especially as we're seeing a lot of lawyers and a lot of different analysts watching this stock and seeing what this outcome may be of this $500 million infant formula verdict.
Wow, so I'm just looking at here, the Wells Fargo analyst says, given that the ABT will appeal, they do not plan to reserve for this verdict or make any reserves for future trials. So I guess, in the greater scheme of things, $500 million isn't that big.
Just thinking a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
All right, Nor, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Thank you very much, Norma Linda, joining us on all the movers that are happening. Are you an Olympics fan? Did you watch the Olympics?
I've been watching. I like the gymnastics. That's my thing.
Oh, my God.
It's
That
so
was
much
amazing.
fun.
Oh, my God. That was so good. All right, let's get back to McDonald's. Michael Halen is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Restaurant and Food Service Analyst joining us on McDonald's earnings. Hey, Michael, what was your bigger takeaway here?
Yeah, I guess, the biggest takeaway is that they still have work to do. The stock's performed pretty well here. I guess results weren't as bad as expected. July data that we've seen is pretty bad. So the fact that they're still negative isn't really surprising. But they definitely still have work to do. The $5 meal deal seems to be bringing in some traffic. They're hopeful that, the sales will follow, but it hasn't happened yet. And they talked about the U.S. really needing a revamp of its $1, $2, $3 dollar value meal, but we see the stock doing well, and it's for good reason. This company has scale that nobody else does. They can offer price points that nobody else can. They have a ton of marketing might. So for those reasons, in this really competitive market where chains are fighting hard to attract low-income consumers, McDonald's definitely has the tools to win.
For me, the McDonald's experience was always an airport experience, because I could always say, I could justify it by saying, hey, I'm rushed for time, I got to make my flight, get something quick. But now all the new airports and the renovated Newark airport, there's no fast food in those things anymore. You have to sit down and order and do all that kind of stuff. So that's why I had.
That's interesting. But isn't there fast food? But it's like nice stuff, like wraps.
Well, you
salads.
can get that stuff to go, but I mean, you could always get some fast food, serious fast food. All right, so Mike, what's the story for McDonald's here? Do they open stores? Do they rationalize their footprint? What's kind of the strategy there in terms of managing their footprint these days?
Yeah, well, they're in their investor day late last year, they pushed for more aggressive store openings, right? And so that's going to continue to be the focus. They're going to push hard to grow internationally. China obviously is a big point of focus for them. But yeah, it's going to be to open stores. But in order to motivate their franchisees to open stores, they're going to have to have a strong marketing program that's going to pull people into the restaurants, the existing restaurants, grow same-store sales, improve profitability, and make it just a more attractive proposition for their international and U.S. franchisees to open new stores.
Didn't they unveil like a $5 meal thingy? But that was at the end of the quarter, right? So we don't really know the full impact of that for McDonald's?
Yes. So on on the call, management said that it's driving traffic, but not price, but not sales yet. So it seems like there's some trade down from current customers saying, you know, well, $5, I get a lot of food for that $5. So maybe instead of getting a Big Mac meal, I'll get this $5 meal deal. But so it hasn't really impacted results yet, but they said that, you know, historically traffic comes before the sales boost, and so they seem positive on it in this near term. You know, they said 93% of franchisees in the U.S. have agreed to extend this offer deeper into the summer, so they seem positive on it, but their real focus is going to have to be on the $1, $2, $3 value menu. That menu isn't resonating with customers, right? And it seems like a full revamp is in the cards. You know, they've received a lot of shade on social media that you can't find anything on that menu for $1. Right, and so some re-engineering is going to be necessary here in the United States.
All right, dumb question of the day comes from me.
Never.
At McDonald's, Burger King, even Starbucks, the drive-through line, they're like 20 cars deep. I walk inside, I walk right up to the counter, and boom, I'm served. What is it about Americans that they into this drive-through thing? And if I'm a McDonald's, isn't that a source of opportunity for me to figure out how to get them through faster?
Yeah, well, I guess we're lazy. That's the problem, right? But no, to your point, you know, a big percentage. You know, historically, the counter was like, say, 15% of a drive-through restaurant sales, and historically, that's really just been used when the drive-through line is too long, and people say, you know, I don't want to wait that long. I'm gonna go inside and pick up my stuff. So. There is an opportunity. It's a point of focus for all of the quick service restaurants we cover. Everybody is constantly trying to improve their throughput, you know, decrease the time waiting in line, because they know if there's, you know, at a certain number of cars for McDonald's, historically it's been, you know, say 5 or 6 cars in the drive-through. People will either drive past the restaurant, or maybe they'll say, you know what, I'll park and come in. But that's potentially business lost, right? So, you know, improving throughput at the drive-through and at the counter is constantly a point.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
But
AI
it hasn't been working, though.
I mean, in theory, right? You get like an IA thingy to do the drive-through, right? But that has been really tough to manage right now, right? It's not really the best.
It's not working. I mean, they're having a lot of trouble with accents, not only from, you know, international customers, but also dialects across the United States. So voice ordering and a lot of these AI initiatives, you know, there's a lot of potential with them, but they haven't been able to really pay dividends just yet.
All right, so what is the investment call here, Mike, for some of these, you know, fast service, McDonald's, Burger King? What's the investment call here for these names?
Well, they're looking at, you know, it's interesting because the year-over-year comparisons, base effects get easier into the second half, but the consumer's weakening, right? And so, you know, McDonald's said they expect, you know, more consumer weakness over the next few quarters, right? And so there's definitely concern about restaurant spending here in the second half. You know, I think I mentioned it at the top. McDonald's is well positioned, though, in you know, periods of distress. You know, during the Great Recession, they outperformed by offering value that competitors couldn't match, right? And so it's a very tough environment, but we think McDonald's is positioned pretty well for such a tough environment.
In the value war, where everyone's chasing a smaller part of everyone's wallet, how do these guys remain profitable? I'm not just like McDonald's, but like all its competitors too. Like, it's sort of a race to the bottom to some perspective. How does that play out?
It's not just a race to the bottom. So in terms of the low end, they're trying hard to keep that low income consumer business, and there's no doubt that that's a big focus right now. But they're also bringing in, you know, middle income and higher income consumers into the fold, right? So you also get this trade down effect where, you know, yeah, sure, low income consumers are trading down into grocery store, but McDonald's and some of their competitors, Jack in the Box being one, you know, Chipotle, have been able to attract these higher income consumers that actually come in and buy premium items and spend more when they come. The problem is they're just a much lower percentage of the overall traffic. But that's what we've seen over the last year and a half or so. Is chains that have been able to attract these higher income consumers are definitely outperforming.
So where in your overall space there, Mike, of on the restaurant side, is the best place to be these days?
You know, it's companies that provide a lot of value and a very good price point, right? And so, you know, like most earnings seasons and industries, you know, a lot of the top performers end up reporting earnings first, and we've seen that Chipotle and Texas Roadhouse are two. They outperform everybody on same-store sales over the last 5 years, and it's not even there's not even a close second. And a big reason why they've outperformed by so much is that customers see a lot of value on that plate for the price that they pay, right? And they're provided a pretty good customer experience, and that's what's bringing people in the door. If you're providing very strong everyday value and a good in-restaurant experience, you know, clean restaurants, good service, whatever that, you know, and everything that entails, then you're winning.
Got it. Simple business, but a tough business, that's for sure. Michael Halen,
Exactly.
Senior Restaurant and Food Service Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, bring us up to date on our good friends at McDonald's here. All right, once again, vital for, like, I'm a fifth grader. What does this company do?
So they move commodities around the world.
They move commodities.
They move stuff around the world, along with Mercuria, Gunvor, and Trafigura. They also can buy up sort of assets as well. So they made a joint venture in a power plant, for example, in the U.S. They can buy sort of LNG tankers. They buy the stuff that they think is going to wind up helping their trading desks. And they have a trading desk, and they trade, and they make a boatload of money. Yep.
Okay.
All these guys are private, and they make boatloads of money because of it. Now, there's issues, right? There's been some accusations from traders of these guys of bribery, etc. So there's that, an overhang, and also the idea that do you profit off of mayhem? Obviously, their profits went through the roof during when the Ukraine war kicked off. So there's also that, which doesn't
Because I was
make people
wondering
feel
why
great.
these aren't housed in some bigger investment banks, but those are some of those reasons probably.
Maybe. Also, I don't think they want to be.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want to have that kind of
Sure.
restriction.
Okay.
They're huge.
Yep, exactly. All right.
All right,
I
coming up,
understand
we are going to talk to Marianne Bartels, Chief Investment Strategist for Sanctuary Wealth, to discuss her outlook on the markets. It's a big week. We got jobs, we got Fed, we got earnings. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The stock index is drifting, mixed trading ahead of a week full of earnings reports from Wall Street's most influential companies. And also that Federal Reserve meeting on interest rates. We'll get a decision on Wednesday on semiconductor, helping lead the market and jumping after the supplier to the auto and other industries reporting stronger profit than analysts had expected. A bigger name set to report later this week. We get Microsoft, that's tomorrow. Apple and Amazon, they're going to report their earnings on Wednesday, and Meta Platforms comes out on Thursday. Their stock movements carry more weight on Wall Street than anybody else's because they're the largest by market value. Right now, the S&P 500, 16 points higher. That's up 0.3%, 54.75 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 56 points right now. That's down about 0.1% at 40,532. And the Nasdaq 100 is up 126 points. That is a rise of 0.6%. The Russell 2000 pretty much unchanged right now, slightly lower. 2-year yield unchanged. That's at 439. And the yield on the 10-year yield, the 10-year is at 417. That is down 2 basis points. And we check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio and streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcasts. And as John was just reporting, busy week here, economic data aplenty, including the Fed on Wednesday. Lots of earnings, particularly for some of the big tech names, which you think are going to be critical for this market. Let's check in with a professional who does this stuff for a living, Marianne Bartels, Chief Investment Strategist at Sanctuary Wealth. Marianne, thanks so much for joining us here. What's your 30,000-foot market call that you have to your clients? What are you telling your clients that they should be thinking about here as we head into the back half of this year?
Well, as you pointed out, it is the alphabet soup of news this week. You know, the markets can go either way, but how we're telling clients to position is we actually think that we can actually rally this week. Markets are as oversold as they were back in April. When we came into this year, we called it the year of the bucking bull. And we've seen some bucks and we just got through some bucks, but we don't think we're done with that yet. We think we can rally one more time. And then I think the market bucks again in the fall, in September and October, the traditional seasonal, very weak period for the market, but then having a year-end rally. We're still expecting markets by the S&P 500 to be up about 20% this year. Wow. We still think the leadership of the market is intact. That's the Magnificent Seven, it's technology, and that semis are still the leaders. Remember, if we're going to go towards AI, you can't have AI without semiconductor chips.
So if the AI trade is still in place, the tech trade is still in place, how do you get comfortable with valuation in some of those names, or just within the S&P 500 in general?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, obviously the valuations were very high. You know, the markets were up by NASDAQ's representation 20%, where a lot of the tech names are. So between the market being extremely overbought, valuations extended, it was time for like a mean reversion kind of trade. Let's bring part of that in. But the reason why these tech names have such high valuation is because they have the strongest growth within the market. Although we're expecting good earnings this year, the market is not abundant with earnings. And when you don't have an abundance of earnings, you have a growth market. Fund managers and investors are willing to pay up for those earnings, so those stocks have higher multiples. So I'm comfortable with higher valuations, but maybe they just got a little bit too stretched. They've corrected, and we're still buyers of this market.
So how do you think about sectors outside of technology? Where do you see opportunities there outside of those big tech names?
Well, there's a couple of spaces. We like infrastructure. You know, Biden has passed a lot of pieces of legislation that are really supporting the growth of the infrastructure of our economy. You're really going to see a lot of stocks within the industrial sector. Defense is also in there. Defense is behaving well. With interest rates coming down and with the Fed expected to cut rates in September, which we also anticipate by 25 basis points, you're starting to see some of the interest-sensitive parts of the market that have not done well, like utilities and REITs, we think have bottomed. Pockets of healthcare are doing better. Biotech has broken out. The breadth of the market has expanded, especially with that rally in July. And we actually hit a new high with breadth indicators, and the volume confirmed that. That's what really gives us confidence that we're still in a bull market and that we still want to be buying stocks here.
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go, Marianne. We had, as you mentioned, kind of over the last several weeks, kind of a little bit of a rotation, maybe out of some of those Magnificent Seven names, maybe into some other areas of the market like small caps. We saw the Russell 2000 outperform the S&P by the most on record over a 2 or 3 week period. Is that trade, is that for real? Is it a flash in the pan? How do you think about that?
So we're not fans of small cap. It has been a very impressive rally, and we think the reason why it was so impressive is that fast money, typically called hedge funds, CTAs, many of them had short positions within small cap, but we think some of those positions were covered, not all of them, but some. We just don't think the earnings power is there for small cap to take over leadership. So we think it's impressive. If you've been there, it's been great, but it's not where we really want to be positioning our clients right now.
How about the fixed income here? You know, you can sit here in a 2-year treasury and get 4.4%. That's not a bad way to make a living here. If I want to maybe take some credit risk, I can do better than that. How do you think about fixed income?
Yes, what we've been saying for a while is that interest rates have peaked, both at the short end and the long end of the curve. We think they're going to continue to come down. For clients that are in cash, that are getting 5% or even above 5%, we're warning them that can go away, especially if the Fed begins a rate cutting cycle. So we've been telling clients to come out of short duration assets and take a little bit more duration risk, go a little bit more in the middle of the curve, which is called the belly of the curve. And as you pointed out, you can take credit risk, but we are stressing to stay with quality.
When you take a look at quality, though, does it matter like why the Fed is cutting? As in, ooh, the economy is getting a lot weaker. We're looking ahead to the jobs number. Everyone's worried about the Claudia Sahm rule being triggered versus inflation coming down.
I think it is. You know, the market thinks that cutting rates can be a negative. And historically, it is a negative because we're cutting for the wrong reasons. The economy is still growing a little bit slower. The consumer is still spending, but a lot slower. We're seeing manufacturing slow down. So I think in order to balance like unemployment, which as you pointed out, the unemployment rate is going out, it's important to actually try not to have a recession. And with these warning signs that the economy is slowing, I think it would be very appropriate for the Fed to cut rates, but the market's not to negatively react because there's really nothing negatively wrong. In fact, what most people are not talking about is that the Fed has already started easing. They changed their position on their balance sheet. They started to have less run off their balance sheet, which is actually a form of easing. So I think the Fed has already been in easing mode. Now it will be official with them cutting rates if they do in September.
Would it be a problem for this market if they surprised us and did not cut in 2024?
Yes,
Ooh,
absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be huge.
That would be a big surprise both for equities and fixed income. Talk about a buck and bull. It's going to be buck and running the wrong way. So I don't think you'd want to do that to the markets. I know people have been speculating that maybe they'll cut at this meeting, but that would be a surprise as well. And I think that would be interpreted as negative as the Fed is panicking over some of the recent data. So I don't think they'll be cutting here. Powell has been pretty traditional in telling markets what he's going to be doing, and he pretty much sticks to that. So I think he's kind of hinted pretty strongly that it's September. It's going to be very interesting to see what they say in the meeting this week. But I'm still betting that it's 25 basis points in September.
Well, before we let you go, what language are you looking at to sort of firm that up? Because you're right, if Powell doesn't want to surprise the market, it either has to be clear in the statement in some way or clear in the press conference in some way.
Yes, so the Fed, Powell has sounded a little bit more dovish. That's kind of the tone, not as hawkish. His words and language have been a little bit softer and a little bit more open that things are potentially weakening. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what they say. And I think what I'm going to be looking for, are they so dovish that the market really starts pricing in a rate cut also for either November or December? Right now, it looks like 100% for September. Some are estimating it could happen in November and December, but that's what I'm really focused on. Do they hint that they cut more than once?
All right, Marianne, thank you so much for joining us. Marianne Bartels, she's the Chief Investment Strategist at Sanctuary Wealth, joining us from New York via that Zoom thing. Appreciate it. There's another bull for you still out there. She was talking about a 20% total move in the S&P 500 for 2024, so still got some work to do. Although she's one of those folks, which I'm in that camp as well, which is, you've been in the market so long, you really get a sense of seasonality during the year. And I don't want to be anywhere near these markets in September and October. But that's just because my first year on Wall Street, I was September 1987, and that was October 1987.
Oh my!
That was grim. So
that's a little traumatizing for you.
Yeah, ever since, you don't want to be anywhere near these markets. All right, coming up, Mike McGlone, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Commodity Strategist. We'll talk some commodities. I think we might even throw in a Bitcoin question or two.
He likes it.
He likes that kind of stuff. All right, with our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Paul, Alex, John, thank you. President Joe Biden has unveiled a long-awaited proposal for changes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Biden is calling on Congress to establish term limits and an ethics code for the court's 9 justices. Professor Wendy Schiller, director of the Alfred Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University, spoke to Bloomberg.
Now, we've got a lot of younger conservatives on the court now, so I don't think they would be really the object of this. But we've got older conservatives and increasingly older liberal justices. And to them, generationally, they don't understand this. And I do think it will take generational change. In other words, they're saying, listen, this doesn't seem smart to us. How about 15 years or 18 years or 20 years rather than lifetime? So I think it's possible to achieve. But again, constitutional amendments are, pretty tough to pass.
Wendy Schiller with Brown University. President Biden also is pressing lawmakers to ratify a constitutional amendment that would limit presidential immunity. Elections officials in Venezuela have declared incumbent Nicolas Maduro the winner in the presidential election, setting him up for a 3rd term, but the opposition claims widespread fraud. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. has serious concerns.
It's critical that every vote be counted fairly and transparently, that election officials immediately share information with the opposition and independent observers without delay, and that the electoral authorities publish the detailed tabulation of votes.
Novak Djokovic beat rival Rafael Nadal in tennis at the Paris Games in the 2nd round today. It's the 60th and likely last head-to-head match between the 2 tennis greats. Meanwhile, the U.S. leads the medal count with 12 overall, including 3 gold. France has 10. China has 9 overall, but China has the most gold with 5. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages, they have turned mixed right now ahead of a week that's going to bring a Fed rate decision and earnings from 4 of the magnificent 7 cohort of stocks. In the S&P 500, 3 of the 11 major industry groups, they're higher right now. In the lead, consumer discretionary, and that is home to shares of Tesla. Morgan Stanley listing Tesla as its top pick in the auto sector. And McDonald's sales, they declined for the first time since 2020. They fell short of analyst expectations for modest growth, but avoided a bigger decline than feared by investors. So that's why it's up. It's, in fact, the leader right now in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. McDonald's shares up 3.5%. Also, you have Abbott Laboratories, worst performing individual stock in the S&P 500. The company ordered by a jury to pay almost $500 million over allegations it hid the risks that its premature infant formula can cause a potentially fatal disease. S&P 500 right now, 11 points higher. That's a 0.2%. 5470 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 112 points. The NASDAQ 100 is up 129 points, and that is a rise of 0.7%. Quick look right now at some of the commodities. NYMEX crude, 78 cents lower, down 1%, 76.38 a barrel. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. One other thing to look at in the market is Bitcoin, up by just 1.2%, but it's actually up $826. That's the highest level earlier today since mid-June. The latest catalyst was Donald Trump expanding his pro-crypto agenda. Plus, you got those expectations that a Fed's going to be inching its way towards a cut, probably in the fall, and that's also helping investor sentiment. So we needed to get the read on that, as well as other commodities, with Mike McGlone, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Commodities Strategist. Do you buy the theory that President Trump comes out and says he's going to fire Gary Gensler and he loves all crypto things, it's going to be #1 in the U.S., therefore, thus, Bitcoin goes up?
Well, I'm impressed how you phrased the question, Alex, because most people seem to be believing that, but I look at it as there's no, and then the lesson you learn is no zealot like a convert. Obviously, he's converted because he hated crypto before, but I think he's finally realizing things we wrote 5 years ago. This space is nothing but good for America. It's most widely tracked crypto is not Bitcoin. It's actually Tether, the U.S. dollar, trades more than Bitcoin, double on a daily basis, but it's impressive what he's doing and saying to get elected. And I think that's the #1 thing. He's saying whatever he can to get elected, and that's what's happening. The crypto people have picked up onto it, but this rally sounds just a little suspicious because it happened right during the conference, the Bitcoin conference that's in Tennessee now that used to be in Miami.
Why isn't it in Miami anymore?
Well, I heard that had some issues. I don't really dig into that, but it's kind of nice to see it move on because I just was on a couple calls this morning with people who were there. There's so much enthusiasm as you expect in crowds and people getting together and all trying to, as they say in the space, pump their bags. But it puts on my radar is this is when you want to be really careful with an asset that's basically 3 times the volatility of beta. The S&P 500 basically has been trading together with beta for 10 years, and I think the risks are that it leads the way lower. So I'm very skeptical. And the key thing I like to say about Bitcoin is a lot of the easy money has been made. We had the GBTC discount, that's gone. That's a Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. We had the ETH discount, that's gone. And things like MicroStrategy have performed so well. I think I'm quite skeptical now at these levels.
Well, when we go back to the fundamental part that President Trump was talking about in terms of wants to make the U.S. the Bitcoin hub and not, say, China or other countries, is that something that the U.S. could actually do?
Well, it already is. I mean, most of them trade in the U.S. Most widely traded crypto on the planet is tethered to the U.S. dollar. We did launch the ETFs in this country, but it went through the normal U.S. discourse that you don't have in China. China has been banned, so it already has. It's just, I think people just have to remember how the system in this country works. There is a rule of law. We fight it out. We come to a proper conclusion, and that's what's happened with Bitcoin. We do have ETFs, and it was our bias in the very beginning when we launched the Bloomberg Galaxy Crypto Index in 2018 that at some point ETFs will track this index and track broad indices. It's all heading that way. I guess Mr. Trump is trying to say it's going to head that way faster. But to me, what he's saying is very much just out to get votes, and it's a question of will he do it, and can he do it?
Hey, Mike, for as long as I can remember, you've been telling us to just shut up and buy gold. It just recently hit an all-time high.
In a nice way. In a nice way.
It recently hit an all-time high. Can you just refresh us on why gold continues to go higher?
Well, the number one reason I think started with the unlimited friendship between President Xi and President Putin, and it changed the world dynamic. Now, top central banks of the world are buying gold. It's becoming the second reserve asset next to the euro, according to the World Gold Council. And that, to me, is an overwhelming force. But what's most significant lately is we have had major outflows in ETFs, which looks like they're just starting to turn back upward. So gold, to me, is the most enduring commodity I think is going to continue to perform. And I do like mentioning in the same space as crypto, because the way I see it with equities getting very expensive, I've been saying for a while, you can't hold gold without some Bitcoin in that space, the digital version. But at some point, I think on a risk-adjusted basis, you're better off overweight in the metal and the analog metal. I think that's what's happening now. That's starting to get a sentiment shift. The way I see it, deflation in the commodities is propelling inflation in gold. So I'll end with this. Right. The Bloomberg Commodity Index, spot index, is right now down on the year. It was up 12% in May, and gold just keeps marching along. I think those trends are going to continue.
So to that point, and this also goes to, I think, the crypto move as well, is there an idea that if the Fed actually cuts, that inflation comes back, and then that's another reason why we're seeing, say, gold and crypto rallying?
I think that's the potential if they cut too fast, but it's the lessons of human nature and history, Alex, are playing out here. We all know that we created too much liquidity and too much inflation. Now, we had a good reason. We all thought we were going to die 4 years ago. Now we're at this space now that I think the Fed's can't cut yet because the stock market's so strong and such a relevant part of GDP, 2 times GDP. It looks like they're going to be behind the curve. The way I see gold, though, it's the most enduring. It's the alternative to treasuries. I think it's the risk-off trade where you look at what's been the most beat-up asset for the last 3 years, long bond U.S. treasuries. And I think that trade's going to be happening together where gold goes up and treasury bond yields decline. And a good indication is what's happening in China, 2.15%. That's the 10-year note yield in China right now. It's the lowest in our database since 2006.
Mike, I want to take you back to your roots, back on the great American farm. Boy, I'm looking at some of these agricultural things, corn, cotton, soybeans, I mean, all down kind of 15, 20%. Tough time to be an American farmer?
So how did you know I was there last week? All my family is in the Midwest. I always do my crop tours, and I have to admit, I meet with family and friends and people who farm the land. I've never seen a more luscious situation. The crop is huge. The weather's been wonderful. The hurricane, it put a swath of rain right in the middle of the corn bed, right during tasseling, when corn needs it the most in July. So the supply is massive, and the problem is we still have supply left over from last year. So I'll end with this. It's the key fact of price, the high price cure. Prices got too high. Supply is massive because prices got high, and now we have to get to the low price cure, and I don't know where that's going to be. And we're going into harvest with oversupply and a good crop, which means lower prices.
How volatile is the weather for farmers right now?
That's the key thing that's been happening, Alex, is you have more volatile minor events like derecho and like spot droughts. But what's happening this year is we have more moisture than normal in the corn belt. I hear that's related to sunspots and things like that. And it's actually been a little bit cooler. So it's almost perfect for grain production, somewhat of a greenhouse effect. But the thing is, I think it's the quote I heard in the Midwest. They always say Brazil, 19 years in a row of increasing production of soybeans out of Brazil. It's just prices are high, and it's a global competitive situation. And here's the quote I like to point out is, the whole thing that Mark Twain used to say, you might as well buy land because they don't create it anymore. But the farmers in the Midwest say, well, they are creating it in Brazil.
All right. Hey, we appreciate you all the time, Mike. Thanks a lot. Mike McGlone, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Commodity Strategist. When are we going to Miami? Sometime in October, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, potentially.
So if we are, we're going to go knock on Mike's door.
Yeah.
We'll just invite ourselves in.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to be there, so look for us. We will keep you posted on that. Let's take a quick check-in here on the market. I have to wonder, is it going to be hard to get a real read-through right now? Because we got the Fed, we got jobs, and we have earnings. Stuart Kaiser over at Citi says you could be looking at like 110 basis points of move on the S&P. That's sort of what's priced in to the options market right now on Wednesday for that FOMC day. And then you also get almost $8 trillion of market cap in earnings coming out on Thursday alone.
Yep. I like
How do you manage that if you're an investor?
No, I don't know. You just got to hedge.
Exactly. You play your options. You're looking at sort of more bullish options also coming in when it comes to small caps as well. We're going to break all that down for you. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom. We'll look at some of the company stories we're following for you. CapCut. This is a video editing app owned by the Chinese tech powerhouse ByteDance. It's rapidly gaining steam and threatening to lure users away from Adobe. The app is a streamlined tool for making videos, especially with effects popular on TikTok, the social platform owned by ByteDance. Since launching outside China in 2020, CapCut has picked up more than 300 million monthly mobile active users and commands 81% of the total active users for mobile video editing. This according to the market intelligence firm Sensor Tower. The sudden dominance, tough news for Adobe, the longtime leader in desktop creative software. Its investors have worried that users would leave behind complicated, professional-oriented applications like Photoshop for simplified tools. A new study finds online sports betting increasing consumer stress as access to gambling proliferates. The U.S. Supreme Court ruling in 2018 led to 38 states legalizing sports gambling. In its wake, the researchers found a substantial increase in loan delinquencies, bankruptcies, and debt collections in states that permitted online sports betting. This according to the working paper that has yet to be peer-reviewed. She laughed, she cried, but it wasn't the best one. Walt Disney's Deadpool and Wolverine took in $205 million in U.S. and Canadian ticket sales this weekend, the biggest domestic debut of this year. The movie also scored the best ever opening for an R-rated picture, with more than twice the ticket sales of Joker during its first weekend. That was a correct review, right?
Yeah, just say it's Alex.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Monday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and economics with our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts who cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. We also bring you world and national news. For that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, John. President Joe Biden has resisted calls from some Democrats to seek reforms to the Supreme Court, but that has apparently changed. Today, the president will call for lawmakers to pass new binding ethics rules and term limits for Supreme Court justices as part of a sweeping proposal that would fundamentally alter the High Court. The plan also calls for a constitutional amendment to ensure that former presidents can be tried for crimes committed while in office. Vice President Harris's presidential campaign says it raised over $200 million in 1 week since President Biden exited the race. Professor Wendy Schiller, director of the Alfred Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University, spoke to Bloomberg.
Democrats still, I think, are chasing real parity in resources, but it certainly shows that she can, in fact, attract the kind of support financially that will make her at least competitive.
Wendy Schiller with Brown University. The French government says multiple telecommunications lines have been hit by acts of vandalism affecting fiber lines as France hosts the 2024 Paris Games. Organizers for the Games say their operations aren't affected. At a news conference overnight, Director General of the Paris Organizing Committee, Etienne Thaubois, acknowledging there have been several challenges with the Games he spent several years planning.
There is 14 days to go, and our eyes are set on the finish line of the 11th of August. Not everything has been perfect, but we will continue to adapt.
Novak Djokovic beat rival Rafael Nadal in tennis at the Paris Games in the second round today. Simone Biles shook off a calf injury to dominate during gymnastics qualifying. U.S. men's basketball team, they rolled past Serbia. And as for the medal count at the Paris Games, the U.S. leads overall with 12. France is second with 10. China has 9, but they have the most gold at 5. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Paul, John.
All right, thank you so much, Michael Barr. I feel like this is worth hitting again. If you were listening earlier, John Tucker's already mentioned this, but the Deadpool Wolverine movie had the best ever opening for an R-rated picture. My 2-cent review, I laughed, I cried. It wasn't as good as 1 and 2, but it was pretty awesome. The reason why I bring it...
And you're into that, so this is an informed opinion.
What part made you cry?
This is so I laughed so hard I cried.
Oh, okay.
There was one
Tears
moment where I couldn't, and then it was just tears overflowing from laughing too hard. But yes, I am a huge nerd. I like Marvel. I've seen all of the movies multiple times, get all the jokes, the whole thing. But the reason why I bring this up now is that there were some really cool merger Fox-Disney things. So if we go back in time, Disney acquired 21st Century Fox back in 2019, which means they got the rights to X-Men and Deadpool, which had previously been at home and Fox. Now, they did a whole skit on this, Ryan Reynolds did in the movie, about how they couldn't show them doing cocaine. And in the other movies that they could, and one of the characters kept trying to get him to say the word cocaine. It's like, we can't say it. And then they call it all these different things. He's like, we can't do it in this movie because they break the fourth wall a lot. Joke. So the inside joke on that, which was pretty great. He specifically addressed the merger as well in the movie, which was also quite funny. And there were lots of different characters from not only the Marvel universe that was already with Disney, but the Disney acquired Fox Marvel universe as well.
So you're all into the inside politics there.
Totally. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
And for investors, it did BAFO, box office is what you say in the Variety magazine. So just a huge box office for the opening weekend, over $200 million North America, $430 million globally for the opening weekend. So this will be another billion-dollar franchise.
Yeah, and they really needed it because let's be honest, guys, those last few Marvel movies were not that great. Anyway, I have more thoughts on this. There's Robert Downey Jr. returning as a villain. I don't know about that at all.
when does the book come
Oh,
out? Yeah.
no. John Tucker should see it, and he'd probably
Yes.
also hate it. All right, coming up, we're going to talk more about these markets, plus the election over in Venezuela and the disruption there. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to kick it off by going down to Caracas, Venezuela. Creighton Harrison, Bloomberg executive editor for Latin America, reporting on Venezuela's opposition disputes claim of Maduro election victory. Look at the latest reporting there. Duncan Fox, Bloomberg Intelligence, consumer staples analyst. Heineken out with earnings. Let's see how things are going there with our good friends at Heineken. RJ Gallagher is going to join us, senior portfolio manager, fixed income and Federated Hermes. Where does he see opportunities in the world of fixed income? So that's all coming up this hour. Let's kick it all off with Mr. Charlie Pellet.
All right, thank you very much, Paul and Alex. We are looking at a down day right now with the S&P 500 index just turning negative moments ago, now at 54.56. Little change, but still down just under 0.1%. The Dow down 115, drop there of 0.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index holding on to a 15-point gain, up by just about 0.1%. So the S&P now lower ahead of major central bank decisions, key economic data, and earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. The 10-year yield now at 4.17%, the 2-year 4.39%. Gold down $5 the ounce, $23.81, drop there of 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil, WTI, down by about 1.8% now. We've got crude 75.77 a barrel. So it is a very busy week for Wall Street. Major tech earnings ahead. As for the Federal Reserve and what to expect Wednesday, Kevin Gordon is senior investment strategist at Charles Schwab.
I think the risk, and rightly so, and the Fed has been pointing to this, and all the Fed speak has been pointing to this, is probably that the labor market's becoming more of the issue that they want to be able to, at least get ahead of, even if it's a couple of rate cuts and hopes to get there. I think that they're trying to signal us in that way.
Kevin Gordon of Charles Schwab. This is a week that will bring a Fed rate decision. In addition, we'll have earnings out of Microsoft tomorrow, followed by Meta Platforms, Apple, and Amazon over the next 2 days. Microsoft up 0.3%, Amazon up 0.1%, Apple in the red down 0.2%, Meta Platforms up by 0.9%. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P turning negative moments ago, down now by 2 points, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. Happy Monday for you. Let's get some individual movers here because some confuse me. Luckily, we have Norma Linda of Bloomberg News to help us through it. So Constellation Brands, that stock is off by about 3%. There's nothing specifically about this company, though, that I saw. So what's going on here?
Yeah, so this is a peer mover. We're seeing a lot of beer brands and alcohol beverage brands lower after looking at those results out of Heineken. They reported results that were sluggish for the first half of this year, and analysts say that these results were disappointing. So we're seeing that bleeding into U.S. trading here today. And we are seeing Constellation Brands down with shares falling as much as 4% in trading today.
Is this a China story? Is this what this is?
It's a bit of a China story as well, because we're watching Heineken. It actually saw a fall in the valuation of its stake in China's largest brewer, which is China Resources Beer Holdings. And this is coming after concerns about consumer demand in the mainland that have affected its share price. So a bit of a China story here as we're seeing these results, and it's obviously dragging on peers more broadly.
I don't get it myself.
You don't get what? Heineken?
You don't get Heineken? Or
no, I mean, why? I mean, people are continue
still
drinking
beer.
They're still drinking beer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just on a
but I'll tell you,
relative
but you go to a bar these days, which I don't do very frequently, but they have so many choices of all these vodka-infused iced teas and lemonades and all that kind of.
Right.
People drinking that stuff?
Oh, yeah.
I think they are. I mean, I know you said that, Alex, you were not a Heineken fan, if I remember correctly from our last conversation.
I'm sorry, Heineken, I'm not. But yeah, go ahead. But like, I feel like for alcohol sales, it was sort of the specialty IPAs and then the sort of the craft beer kind of surge. What was that, 10 years ago? And then now it's all about the infused drinks, etc. That's really high alcohol content. Have you looked at those? The infused drinks?
No.
It's like 11-15%. Some of these guys.
All right.
Anyway, all right. Speaking of drinking / then food, McDonald's.
Good segue. Looking at McDonald's shares, they're higher, and actually we were seeing shares lower at the beginning of trading today. But Wall Street is deeming this report out of McDonald's as better than feared. We're seeing shares up for their best day in 2 years. They're climbing as much as 4.5% in trading. But it did see sales that declined for the first time since 2020. It's really been trying to vie for a lot of attention and traction from lower income buyers, and it seems to be seeing a bit of a pullback in that space. It's saying that its $5 deal hasn't yet had an effect on sales at the company, and they're expecting to raise prices less than they have before this year.
I like the quarter pounder with cheese. I've been ordering that since I can remember.
You
Get number one with a Coke. It's the same order it's been since I was like 12.
I haven't had McDonald's in at least 20 years.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if my stomach could take it anymore, to be honest.
I think the last thing I had were some French fries.
I mean, they smell great. I love the smell. All right, and before we let you go, Guardian Health.
Yes, let's quickly look at Guardant Health. We're seeing it hitting its highest intraday level since September. It's pairing gains to around 3%, but it was earlier up as much as 9%. Now, this is after it got its blood tests getting FDA approval. We are seeing it receiving FDA approval for its colorectal cancer screening in adults ages 45 or older who are at the average risk for this disease. And this is really important because we are seeing a time where the disease is rising at a worrying rate in younger Americans. So this is really good news out of Guardant Health here.
Which disease is this?
This is colorectal cancer.
No, thank you.
Not good.
Not looking for that.
All right. Thanks, Nora. Really appreciate Norma Linda joining us on the Bloomberg Equities team right here at headquarters. Let's just hit on geopolitics here and the latest news. President Nicolas Maduro was declared the winner of Sunday's election in Venezuela, and the opposition has rejected that claim and has now called on the military to enforce what it said was the will of the people. Apparently, Venezuela's electoral center said Maduro won 51.2% of the vote versus 44.2% for its rivals. So let's get more details on this. Creighton Harrison is Bloomberg executive editor of Latin America, and he joins us now. Creighton, how is this going to play out?
Well, these next 24 hours are going to be really crucial. Maduro is going to take the election agency's results and make hay of them and try to consolidate power once again so he can rule for the next 6 years. And that will mean we're waiting for a press conference right now from the Attorney General here in Venezuela. We'll see if he announces any sort of legal action against members of the opposition. That's a possibility. Another big factor is going to be what the military does. We're still waiting to hear from the Defense Ministry, the leading generals, about what they're going to do and whether they're going to back up these results. And then, of course, there's what happens with the opposition. The opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, is expected to speak later today. Will she call people to come out on the streets and put some pressure on the regime? You also have the international community. Brazil has not weighed in yet, beyond saying that they'd like to see a full accounting of the vote, which is what several other Latin American neighbors have said. The U.S. has said it has serious concerns. So there's a lot of levers still to pull on the international side as well. So we're in sort of a crucial period where Maduro is trying to consolidate power, get everything under his control and everyone behind him, and all the other actors are trying to make sure that doesn't quite happen yet.
Creighton, what do we know about what the people of Venezuela want? Has there been any polling or anything like that? Is there popular support for Maduro?
So we have one exit poll from yesterday's vote from a reputable firm, Edison Research, that found that the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, won with about 2/3 of the vote, so 30 percentage points ahead of Maduro. So again, one exit poll. And then the opposition has cited their own numbers, which come from the voting machines, but they've only gotten access to about 40% of that data. But with that 40% that they have, they say that Edmundo Gonzalez, again, their candidate, had 70% of the vote out of those 40% of the results that they were able to get. So it's pretty hard to see how you get from that to Maduro winning with 51% of the vote. They said the election agency said they had 80% of votes tabulated last night.
Before we let you go, you're coming to us from Caracas in Venezuela. What's it like there on the street?
it is eerily quiet here. It's a little too quiet. I think a lot of people have stayed home from work today. People are kind of hiding and watching to see what happens next. So the roads are pretty empty, and you are hearing occasional horns honking, and there have been some reports of people banging on pots and pans in places, which is a thing people do to protest in Latin America, but nothing major yet.
All right, Creighton, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Creighton Harrison, Executive Editor of Latin America, joining us from Venezuela. Let's get back to the markets. Nora was just talking about this, but Heineken, those shares are down almost 10% over in Europe, taking about a $949 million hit from China, giving a cautious outlook. And it wasn't just China, it's also U.S. and Europe as well. So we want to get more on that and head to our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. Duncan Fox is Bloomberg Intelligence Consumer Staples Analyst, is joining us. Hey, Duncan, can you run us through the laundry list of the things that were a problem for Heineken this quarter?
Well, I suppose the main one was consumer sentiment is still quite weak. What they were hoping for was a bit of a bounce back in Europe for volume with the Euro 2024. But unfortunately, the weather was just, again, poor in Northern Europe. So that was a hit. In China, it's just that China Resources beer share price has been below the price they bought it for about 4 or 5 months now, and the accounting system means they have to take that hit. So if that share price goes back up again whenever the Chinese economy recovers, then they'll get some sort of recovery from that, but I can't tell you when that will be. So it's just dull consumer.
So what is Heineken saying about just underlying demand in general? What are they saying about the consumer, and is there regional differences, I guess?
Basically, the consumer's been hit by inflation for the last 2 years, probably double-digit pricing, and I think they're just paring back. The big problem is that people are not really going to the pub as much, the on-trade. That's where they make great profit. Well, in Europe, it's certainly been the case. And in places like Africa, where you've had devaluation as well, you've just got to work your way through that. And they've done a very good job, actually, but you still have the short-term issue. Where Nigeria is a big market for them, and you get a massive devaluation, and so they're just working their way through all these issues. They're doing actually quite a good job on the ground, but weather was the real thing that was a surprise. I mean, the upgraded guidance a little, but I think people were expecting a bit more because of the Euro 24.
So Paul brought up sort of those mixed infused cocktails and stuff. I can get a mimosa in a can. It's not terrible at all. Does Heineken have exposure to that kind of stuff, and is that sort of eroding the appeal of beer at all?
Well, beer's getting it from every angle, really, because you're seeing a lot of these new odd drinks. I'll probably agree with Paul on that one. Some of them are a bit weird, but they've got Desperado, which is a spirit-based beer, a tequila-based beer, which is doing very well. So they have got things that they can attack these products with, but you need to keep basically innovating with new things all the time. Diageo are doing a pretty good job on trying to do that, but the problem is some of these don't last very long, the 18 months, and then things sort of fall off a cliff. So you've got to sort of keep replacing them, otherwise you get into a bit of trouble. So actually the Heineken one's doing well, but they just haven't come up with innovation in that area. It's probably not their key area for them.
Hey, Duncan, if I were to go later on today to Sandbanks Beach in Dorset, which is in the southwest of England, is it a beach day today? Am I going to get, what's it like out there at Sandbanks Beach?
Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful here today. I'm about 40 miles away from it, but if I could get there, I would. I'd go to a different beach this evening. And it's beautiful, about 24 degrees, very sunny, lovely.
Lovely. See?
Perfect day for a beer.
Perfect day for a beer. So that's some kind of segue. So let's go to that, Duncan. Is Heineken calling out different regions of the world behaving differently? Is the U.S. market stronger than the European
As
market
in, like,
or Asia?
if you have a nice beach, your sales are up?
Exactly.
Well, certainly if the sun's out. They're not that big in the US. Latin America, they're big, and they've taken quite a lot of costs out. They were importing bottles to Brazil, for instance, which is a huge market for them. So they've taken the cost down. So it's not particularly great consumer environment there, but the profits are improving because they've realigned their cost base. In Asia, they're bouncing back from a really horrid time last year, where the economies, Vietnam in particular, had a terrible time in sort of Q2 and Q3 last year. So that's bouncing back. I wouldn't say the beer market, because of regulation, is buoyant, but they're gaining share, and they've done innovation on the beer market there that seems to be working very well. So there are a few issues in Asia that they've still got to overcome. China, it's quite a chunky bit of their market now, so they need to see that economy improve. Places like Cambodia have got a bit of an issue in the short term because of the economic growth. So it's just a case of good old policies from governments turning the economies around, and China get a bit happier with life, and people then go out and buy beer.
We were also just talking to our Bloomberg Equities reporter at Norma Linda about Constellation Brands. That's not getting dragged down by Heineken. Is that a fair assessment? Like, is Heineken a warning sign to all the alcohol producing companies, or is a lot of this just a Heineken specific issue?
I think it shows it's a difficult time for beer companies in particular. I mean, there was a hope that the summer of sport would give them a nice fillip, but if the weather's bad, you just can't get that volume. People have to go out and buy the beer, preferably the premium beer. So, that's going to hit maybe ABI, Constellation a little bit, but they're in completely different markets. I don't know, I don't cover Constellation, but I think they're doing very, very well in the US, taking share off ABI after last year's marketing errors. And it does seem that premium beer is doing quite well. I mean, Heineken had 9% volume growth for the half for the Heineken brand, which sells at about a 25-30% premium to mainstream beer. So there are pockets in there that are doing well. If you've got good premium brands, you can do well. Spirits, we get the main results tomorrow, so that could be interesting. But we know there's sort of inventory issues there that need to be sort of ticked off before you'll see a recovery. If Diageo and Campari say that, then we could you could see a shift out of beer, maybe back into spirits in the short term. But
all right. Duncan, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Duncan Fox, consumer staples analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence, zooming in from lovely Dorset on the southwest coast of England. Something to think about heading out to the beach there.
All right.
24. This is how you
Field
convert.
trip.
This is how I convert Celsius into.
Okay.
Take it. I double it and add 30, and that gets me pretty darn close. So 24 degrees Celsius, 48 plus 30, 78. That's a nice day. That's about as good as it gets in England.
I like
I'm
that.
guessing.
Double it, add 30.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to use that because sometimes, I just kind of guesstimate it. You don't know if it's true. Anyway, here's an article, guys, that's just playing high right now. Morgan Stanley chief U.S. economist Ellen Zentner is leaving her post for a newly created team within the bank's investment wing. She's going to lead the new thematic and macro investing team at Morgan Stanley's Global Investment Office and reporting to Lisa Shallett, who's the CIO of the Wealth Management Unit. Yeah, this is really interesting. Congratulations to Ellen Zentner.
A couple of our faves there.
Yeah. All right, coming up, RJ Gallo, a senior portfolio manager, fixed income at Federated Hermes. He's going to join us on the markets. What do you do when you have the Fed and the jobs data on 1 week? Plus, earnings. How do you hedge?
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks now in the red across the board. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all lower. S&P at 54.54, down 4 points, a drop now of 0.1%. After a higher open, we've got the Dow down 80, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ also in the red, tumbling 17 now, a drop for NASDAQ of 0.1%. 10-year at 4.17%, the 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold now down $13 the ounce, drop there of 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.4%, 76.09 for a barrel of WTI. McDonald's sales declined for the first time since 2020 in the second quarter, falling short of analyst expectations for modest growth. Stock, however, is advancing today. We've got McDonald's up by 3.9%. Rivals Restaurant Brands International, ticker QSR, it is the parent of Burger King, up 0.4%, and Wendy's trading higher by 1.4%. So again, recapping, stocks are lower across the board now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red with the S&P down 7, a drop there of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio in New York City. And we're also streaming live on YouTube, so you can go there and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find it. Busy economic data week this week. I think kind of capped off. We got jobs at the end of the week, but also we got the Fed decision coming up on Wednesday. 2 p.m. will be the decision. 2:30 press conference, all Wall Street time. Bloomberg will be covering it for you. Michael McKee taking the Acela train down to D.C., and he'll be all set to go there. What do they do? That's the question here. RJ Gallo, he's a senior portfolio manager for fixed income at Federated Hermes, on Zoom from one of my favorite towns in the U.S., Pittsburgh. Big fan. I think they punch way above their weight in Pittsburgh. RJ, talk to us about what you expect to hear from your Federal Reserve on Wednesday.
Good morning. Glad to hear you're fond of my hometown.
Love it.
In terms of the Fed, you know, there's no dots. There's always a press conference and there's always a statement. I feel like Powell and company have laid the groundwork for the further embrace of the idea that the dual mandate has returned. For much of the last 12 to 18 months, the Fed had operated almost as if they were a single mandate central bank, fighting inflation, full stop. Of course, that's not their case. Their charge is a dual mandate. It's maximum employment, stable prices, fighting inflation. And the maximum employment element of the dual mandate is very much back on the table. Now that you've got inflation in a range that's tolerable and it appears to be likely to continue to decelerate, the Fed has laid the groundwork to focus on jobs again. The unemployment rate is up. It's a 4.1%. It's up a little over 0.4 from its lows. That's enough to get the Fed to pivot, I think, back in towards this easing mode. Remember, the market outran the Fed at the end of last year. We spent all of the winter and spring pushing back on the market. You had negative total returns for bonds. But since April 30th, you've gotten more constructive returns to bonds. So the Treasury index is up almost 4% since then, as the inflation has cooperated and the Fed has reopened the door to easing. And I think they're going to address that at this coming meeting without actually changing rates.
So why not just cut now?
That's a great question. I think that the Fed, it all comes down to that word confidence, which you've heard them uttering quite a bit lately. Recall it wasn't that long ago that the Fed had high confidence that inflation was going to be transitory. That obviously wasn't the case. I think that they feel now they would like to see yet more data. There's a risk there, of course. If the market expects you to cut in September, you're at a meeting, this week, and you're anticipating that the data will cooperate between now and September. There's a lot of uncertainty here. The risk that they're taking is that the inflation data will continue to moderate, but the jobs data won't fall off some sort of cliff. Probably a reasonable risk. The economy seems to have decent momentum. Q2 GDP data turned out to be stronger than anticipated. It's true that the jobs market's lost some of its verve, but it's still very much, expanding in the sense that jobs keep getting created at a pretty reasonable pace. So it's a bet they're willing to take. If they were to ease this week, I think that would telegraph to markets that the Fed has gotten much more concerned about the employment part of their mandate, and it might sort of backfire. Bond yields would probably rally, collapse much more rapidly, maybe 25, 30 basis points, because people would be concerned that the Fed is anticipating greater economic weakness. In so doing, it could actually blow back in the other direction, keep the economy buoyant, and then inflation doesn't cooperate. There's not a pure science here. There's a lot of judgment, and in their judgment, they think waiting is a reasonable risk.
RJ, I'm a big fan of municipal bonds. I like to think of myself as one of the larger private creditors to the state of New Jersey through my municipal bond holdings. What do you think about the muni market here?
Well, the muni market, if you look back, there's very, very strong correlations in total returns between munis and treasuries. If you look at monthly total returns for 25 years, the correlation of returns is around 60%. It's not 100, but it's still high. So interest rates are the driving theme that link the muni market to the taxable market. That is very clear. Beyond that, you worry a lot about muni-specific dynamics. For example, expected changes in tax rates or changes in the supply of munis coming into the marketplace. This year, supply has been heavy, but demand has been buoyant, and muni ratios have remained relatively rich, sort of below long-term averages. Why is that? I think there is some concern that tax rates might be rising as we move forward down the calendar here. The Trump tax cuts basically sunset with respect to personal income tax rates. Investors are, I think, motivated to lock in some still relatively high muni yields, in part because the interest rate cycle has pushed yields up, and in part because they think taxes might be going up in the future. If Trump gets reelected, he'll probably try to extend all those personal tax rates, and muni returns might actually sort of be a little vulnerable. Even if interest rates are coming down, munis might not keep up and rally quite as hard. In short, we think munis are still a pretty safe place to be from a credit standpoint. The rates scenario is probably getting more constructive. The tax policy scenario and the related supply dynamic have been the greater questions. But those are sort of tolerable risks in the near term. I think munis are a pretty good place to be for you and for many others.
Okay, yeah. So you love munis, but then you take every Friday off, and then I'm at the muni segment.
I know.
And I'm literally prepping all week to make it to my muni segment. RJ, talk to me about the curve. Do we get that steepener finally? What does the steepener look like? Is it going to be because buying in the front end or a sell-off in the long end? And what does all that wind up meaning?
Great questions. On the month, so July is almost over, right? So the 2s, 10s, and the 530s Treasuries curves have steepened 15 and 17 basis points, and the 230, very long curve, has steepened 23 basis points. The steepener is working. At Federated Hermes, we sort of look at the top-down drivers of fixed income portfolios, duration, curve, credit, and we assemble some of our top people in what we call alpha pods or investment committees. Our yield curve committee has been very successful positioning for the steepening that has occurred. We think there's still more to come. The steepening typically is resulting from a couple things. One, even though inflation's come down, which would make you feel like the curve should flatten, the curve's been inverted for so long that the fact that the Fed has opened the door to easing, as we were talking about a few moments ago, that has helped the curve to steepen back out. The curve should steepen so long as the Fed continues in that easing direction, number one. Number two, so long as the economy doesn't sort of stumble rapidly or inflation resurges. So we think that the yield curve is working for us. We still like the bet. In the muni space, the curve's been strangely U-shaped, heavily driven by expectations for a softer Fed. And as the Fed's moved in that direction, the U is hollowing out. It hasn't fully become an upward sloping curve just yet, but the same dynamic that manifested in Treasuries is now working in terms of sort of making a more reasonable shape for the muni curve as well.
How much credit risk are you guys willing to take these days?
So the muni credit scenario has been very favorable. The long economic expansion post-pandemic, which has outpaced most people's expectations in terms of job creation and in terms of outright GDP growth, that's a rising tide that lifts all muni boats. State governments are doing well. You mentioned the state of New Jersey. They've been upgraded into the single A range. You even had the state of Illinois, which at one point a number of years ago, we were debating whether they should be a junk bond. They've been upgraded into the single A range. We've had I don't know if it's been a golden era, but it's been a strong period for muni credit, both at the state level and the local level. The local level's benefited sharply from rising property valuations. We all worry about commercial real estate, specifically offices, but when you consider that residential real estate has surged and many municipalities in this country have more residential than office in their tax base, generally speaking, local governments are also doing relatively well. In a world like that, so long as we anticipate the economy still growing and the Fed's moving towards an ease, we're still happy to take mid and low quality credit risk in our muni portfolios. So we've been overweight A's and overweight in the high yield space, and it's worked. That's been the best performing part of the muni market on a year-to-date basis by far. Going forward, spreads are a little tighter. It's probably a little less compelling, but we still like the carry idea. And so long as the Fed's easing and the economy's not tanking, taking some credit risk in munis is probably the right place to be.
Hey, RJ, we really appreciate you. Thank you very much, RJ Gallo, Senior Portfolio Manager. Great insight there. Fixed income over at Federated Hermes joining us. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by Julia Atwood. She's BNEF, which is Bloomberg New Energy Finance Team, Industrial Decarbonization Specialist. So basically, what are the cool technologies and policies we need to see to make the world greener? And quite frankly, what happens after the November election when it comes to the U.S. and greening?
Exactly. Depends who is in the White House.
Does it or does it not? I don't know. We're gonna break it down. Maybe that ship has left the building. Ship had left. That's not right. The port. Ship has left the port.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Horse is out of the barn.
There you go. We also have world national news for you here with Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, Charlie. President Joe Biden will call for lawmakers to pass new binding ethics rules and term limits for Supreme Court justices. Professor Wendy Schiller, director of the Alfred Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University, spoke to Bloomberg.
And I can tell you the younger generation, if I can use my students for a second as an example, they have been, really suggesting that lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices make no sense to them because you're raised in a generation, you're raised in a cohort, your experiences matter, and to have people who are 75 years old, like we say, making decisions about 25-year-olds, for them there's a disconnect.
Wendy Schiller with Brown University. The plan also calls for a constitutional amendment to ensure that former presidents can be tried for crimes committed while in office. The explosive park fire in Northern California has grown into the biggest fire in the state this year, burning up to 5,000 acres per hour. Thousands of residents have been evacuated. This woman and her husband scrambled with their 7 dogs.
Whatever we had can be replaced, but I wouldn't have left the animals at all.
The man allegedly responsible heads to court today. Fiber optic cables carrying broadband service across France's southern and eastern regions were cut overnight in the latest attack on the country's infrastructure during the Paris Games. Connections serving Paris weren't affected. As for the games themselves, Novak Djokovic beat rival Rafael Nadal in tennis in the second round today. Simone Biles shook off a calf injury to dominate during gymnastics qualifying. U.S. men's basketball team, they rolled past Serbia. As for the medal count at the Paris Games, the U.S. leads overall with 12. France is second with 10. China has 9. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all moving into the red right now. Russell 2000 lower as well. The Russell 2000 down now by 1%. To put that in context, S&P 500 index down right now by about 0.1%. S&P lower by 7. The Dow down 127 now, a drop there of 0.3%, while NASDAQ down by 0.1%. Stocks lower ahead of major central bank decisions. Key economic data, jobs report Friday, and earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. 10-year right now, 4.16%. The 2-year, 4.38%. Spot gold down 0.5%, $23.74 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.7%, $75.86 a barrel. Financial markets are awaiting this week's major news on the economy, from the Fed meeting on rates to the Labor Department's monthly jobs report. With a look ahead, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Bloomberg Economics says Fed officials may signal a willingness to cut rates as soon as September amid signs inflation is finally moderating. We'll get word Wednesday. The U.S. jobs report set for Friday is expected to show unemployment leveled off in July. Bloomberg Economics points to official WARN data signaling fewer plans to cut jobs. Also on tap this week with a labor market theme, Tuesday's data on job openings and Thursday's productivity report. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Among mega-cap tech names that report this week, Microsoft up by about 0.1%, Amazon up 0.2%, Apple lower now by 0.4%, Meta Platforms up 0.4%. Briefly, Vitol Group paid a record dividend of $6.5 billion, with a B, $billion last year. The latest evidence of how the energy crisis has delivered spectacular riches to the world's commodities traders. The payout represents an average of some $14 million for each of the roughly 450 employees who own the company. And that's a look at some of our top business stories. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. We appreciate that. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, where we bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover about 2,000 companies in 130 industries worldwide. We also have an amazing part of Bloomberg called Bloomberg NEF, and they cover all the research that you need to know on commodities, power, transport, industry, buildings, ags, technology, business, finance. If we want to go green and transition, this is the place you need to be to get all the data for us. And one area of the market that's particularly difficult to decarbonize is what they call industry. So think of things like cement. It's really hard to change how you make cement. So it leaves us with other kind of options we need to be looking at. So I want to delve into that a little bit more today. And joining us for that is Julia Atwood. She is a BNEF Industrial Decarbonization Specialist. So Julia, just give us some context as to how hard it is for just industry, we just call industry, to decarbonize.
Well, it's a really difficult challenge because you have so many different processes and you have a massive asset base. So there are a lot of factories that are already operating and are going to be operating for a very long time, especially in the biggest producers. So China has a vast amount of capacity, doesn't want to change it, doesn't want to close it. The costs are also pretty steep right now. You're not in the same position as transport and power where you've got something cheaper and greener. You're talking about a 50% increase in costs on average for a lot of these materials to get greener.
Where do you start? I mean, in your analysis, make me smarter in 2 or 3 minutes about what you're working on and kind of where the trends are going.
The main thing that you can start with is really working with existing technologies and processes that are a little bit greener. So recycling is a great option. If you use recycled steel instead of new steel, you're reducing emissions by 75%. If you do that for aluminum, you're reducing them by 90%. So that's the first stage. And that's what a lot of companies are thinking about between now and 2030. Better energy efficiency, more recycling. After 2030 is when you have to start making those massive emissions reductions in order to get to net zero. So that's when you have to look at hydrogen and carbon capture and building new types of plants that can be electrified and use clean power.
Will we ever have something that's called green cement, for example?
I think we will. We've seen more progress in cement than I would have expected at this point. It's one of the toughest because it needs to use carbon capture and storage. And for that, you need massive infrastructure that we just haven't built yet. But the cement industry is already announcing more projects, and they have some people who are willing to buy that material at a premium.
How are different parts of the world approaching this differently? Are there some parts of the world, like a China, that's just not incented to do it and is basically not going to play along? How is it geographically?
The good thing is that geographically, most countries have net zero targets. Okay. So even if companies aren't interested in doing something right now, if they don't have an immediate push, they're going to have one eventually. So in China, we've seen some incentives specifically around aluminum. With aluminum, you can also reduce the carbon emissions a lot if you switch from using coal power to hydropower. So the Chinese government is saying, we want you to move your aluminum capacity to places where you have hydropower. Now in Europe, there's a much better push factor because you have carbon pricing. So we think by 2030, green steel is going to be out-competing unabated or gray steel in Europe. So there's a lot of movement there and a lot of new projects being announced.
So if I'm just reading between the lines here, up until 2030, there's some quote-unquote low-hanging fruit. Not that any of this is low-hanging fruit, but there's low-hanging fruit to sort of help to decarbonize an industrial process. After that, though, that's where big-time CapEx needs to come in and like new things need to be done. Like hooking up a refiner or something with hydrogen is going to be very complex and very expensive. Who pays for that?
It's probably going to be a combination of the customers and the companies themselves. So in the case of having a carbon price, you're going to have to pay that money anyway. So either you're emitting and you pay, or you pay extra for something green. The governments around the world are thinking about how they can incentivize this. Now, the US has really gone in with subsidies. So the Inflation Reduction Act is going to pay for a lot of these changes in the case of the US. In Europe, it's just going to be a combination of big grants from governments that want to bring green manufacturing capacity to their region. That's more jobs. It's security for Europe in its material supply. So it's going to be a combination of increased costs for the people buying it, talk about green premiums, governments, and then the companies thinking about how they want to spend their money.
Remind us what the targets are and the timeframes are for achieving these things.
Ideally, you would just start reducing emissions immediately. Okay. Most companies are saying they want a 20 to 30% reduction in their emissions by 2030. Okay. And then most countries and companies are then saying net zero by 2050. You have a few that say 2060, like in China, or 2070, like in India.
I also wonder, too, if policies change, okay, if President Trump wins the White House, he's made a big deal about rolling back things in the IRA. Is your sense from companies, though, that the money's already going, like the projects are committed or the way forward is committed regardless of policies? Or if something like that is rolled back, will that have a material knockdown effect?
I think you're always going to see CapEx grants because we've seen that historically. Anytime you build a big thing, the local government is probably going to give you some money. The key thing is what happens with your OPEX subsidies, because OPEX costs are much more important for green materials production than CapEx. Now, we think that carbon capture and hydrogen are both things that are pretty popular in Republican regions and with companies. They've already started those investments. They know about the technology. So we think that they have a pretty good chance of sticking around.
Are you from Canada?
I am, yes. You can tell.
Oh, yeah.
The about. Yeah, you got that. Yeah.
Love it.
Really great stuff, Julia. Thanks a lot. We appreciate that. That's really helpful to sort of sort through all of this. Definitely come back. Julia Atwood, BNEF Industrial Decarbonization Specialist. It's sort of like we're going there, so then how we get there and the money associated with it is going to be the question.
I hope it's like a lot of things. It just builds up a momentum that you can't stop, and it's kind of self-fulfilling momentum that you don't need to worry so much about which administration's in power.
And there's been a lot of talk about, is it energy transition or is it energy addition or is it energy inclusion, like versus like an actual switch? So there's lots of debate there picking up as well. All right, thanks so much, Julia Atwood, joining us from VNAP. Look at the markets going nowhere fast. Volume also light on this day. The Treasury market also kind of going nowhere. We're going to break all that down for you. This is Bloomberg. Michael Barza, World National.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. McDonald's not as bad as feared. Stock up by 4.1% right now. McDonald's sales did decline for the first time since 2020 in the second quarter, falling short of analysts' expectations for modest growth. The chain's comparable sales, a metric tracking restaurants open for over a year, fell 1% from the year prior. Each of McDonald's geographic segments saw sales declines. In the U.S., the trend was driven by a decline in foot traffic that partially offset by higher prices. McDonald's shares today, they're up 4.1% among rivals. QSR, Restaurant Brands International, that is the parent of Burger King, up 0.6%, and Wendy's up now by 1%. Tesla shares are gaining after Morgan Stanley named the company as its new top pick within the U.S. auto sector, replacing Ford. And with more on the story, here's Bloomberg's Kimberly Adams.
Rat Pack members will be able to defend their communities from rodents and achieve our goal of making New York City the least rat-friendly city in America.
There we go. Mayor Adams talking about rats in New York City. Apple's upcoming artificial intelligence futures will arrive later than anticipated, missing the initial launch of its upcoming iPhone and iPad software overhauls, but giving the company more time to fix bugs. Sources tell Bloomberg the company is planning to begin rolling out Apple Intelligence to customers as part of software updates coming by October. That means the AI features will arrive a few weeks after the initial iOS 18 and iPad OS 18 releases planned for September. We've got Apple down now by 0.1%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Monday. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We're broadcasting to you live from our interactive broker studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. We also bring you all the news you need to know. And for that, we go to Michael Barr with world and national news. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul, Charlie, Vice President Kamala Harris says the proposal President Joe Biden has unveiled for changes to the U.S. Supreme Court would help restore confidence in the court. Biden is calling on Congress to establish term limits and an ethics code for the court's 9 justices. Biden also is pressing lawmakers to ratify a constitutional amendment that would limit presidential immunity. Former President Donald Trump has agreed to participate in a victim interview by the FBI for the investigation into the July 13th assassination attempt at a rally in Pennsylvania. Investigators said they believe the shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, used foreign-based encrypted email apps before the attack. A 6-week abortion ban begins today in Iowa. Pro-choice activist Lynn Zenz heads the Iowa Abortion Access Fund.
Abortion is still legal before 6 weeks or in cases of rape and incest. However, the reality is that most people who can become pregnant don't find out that they're pregnant until at least like 8 to 10 weeks.
Anti-abortion activist Maggie DeWitten is head of Pulse Life Advocates.
We are looking forward to next legislative session already and hope to introduce a life at conception bill here in Iowa because we will not rest until all of our preborn brothers and sisters are protected under our law.
The Iowa Supreme Court ruled 4-3 last month that the ban could be enforced. A number of fiber optic cables carrying broadband service across France's southern and eastern regions were cut overnight in the latest attack on the country's infrastructure during the Olympic Games. The Games were not affected. Authorities also say they've made an arrest after coordinated fires on French rail lines disrupted trains ahead of Friday's opening ceremony. Meanwhile, at the Paris Games, Novak Djokovic beat rival Rafael Nadal in tennis in the second round today. The U.S. leads the overall medal count with 12. France has 10 overall medals. China is third at 9, but has the most gold at 5. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, and Charlie.
All right, thanks so much, Michael Barr. We have some breaking news for you right now. In terms of the Venezuelan election, public prosecutor Tarek William Saab hosted a news conference today, and he has said that there is suspicion of electoral sabotage, saying that Lester Toledo is the main suspect of electoral sabotage, and that Machado is suspect of electoral sabotage. Just trying to weed through some of the details like this. Remember, the overall takeaway was that after the election, President Nicolas Maduro was declared the winner with 51.2% of the vote versus his rival, Edmundo Gonzalez, of 44.2%. Now, the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, was barred from running, and she said that her coalition had gained access to 40% of the tabulated votes and had Gonzalez winning 70% so far. But it does look like the public prosecutor in Venezuela says Machado is suspect of electoral sabotage.
Oh, that's just what they need down there.
Yeah. I just think that getting to the bottom of this obviously will be quite difficult. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday that he is serious, or the U.S. has serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. So getting to the bottom of this is going to be very difficult. The Maduro government regularly has been accused of undermining democracy to ensure its survival.
And in the marketplace, investors were skeptical of Maduro's victory to begin with Venezuela's sovereign bonds maturing in 2027, losing losing 1.4 cents to trade around 20 cents on the dollar. That's according to indicative pricing data compiled by Bloomberg. Securities issued by state-owned oil company Petróleos de Venezuela, they also dropped.
All right, well, we will continue to stay on this news for you. That does wrap it up for Paul and me on this Monday. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is coming up next as we look in the market in general, and you're seeing a little bit of softness within the equity market. Just an update for you. The S&P is up about 0.2%. The NASDAQ up by 0.3. The Dow is flat. Volume, though, very mixed, and a big week for the equity and bond market.
Politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The White House warns Israel the situation could spin out of control. Welcome to the fastest show in politics at a delicate moment between Israel and Hezbollah and the rest of the Middle East that we will discuss in a moment with Bloomberg's Ian Marlowe with us today in Washington. The presidential campaign still on warp speed. We'll get the lay of the land with some new fundraising numbers for Kamala Harris with Don Levy from Siena College Research Institute. He was out with the first polling in the wake of Joe Biden dropping out. Donald Trump says he'll fire Gary Gensler. We'll have analysis on both sides of the campaign from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are along for the ride. Welcome to Monday. Let's get started, as always, on Wall Street. For that, we turn to our friend Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Happy Monday. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all of a sudden back in the green. Turnaround since our last update right now. Russell 2000 as well, trading lower, down 0.8%, but everything else higher. Little changed on the Dow right now, up less than 0.1%, higher by 11. We've got the S&P up 15, gain there of 0.2%. NASDAQ up 68. Higher by 0.4%. 10-year at 4.17% with a 2-year 4.38%. Gold down $10 the ounce, 23.76, down by about 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%. 75.80 right now for a barrel of WTI. Very busy week ahead of us here. Stocks higher right now ahead of major central bank decisions. The Fed on Wednesday, key economic data, jobs report Friday, and earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. As for the Fed and the timing of potential rate cuts, there's always the question of politics. John Stoltzfus is chief investment strategist at Oppenheimer.
We think the Fed is likely, with greater certainty, that the Fed will cut 25 bips at a time, once in November and once in December. It will avoid having its critics saying that it's politically motivated if it cuts in September, and also just gives the Fed a little bit more leeway, room or space to judge how confident it can be when it starts cutting.
John Stoltzfus of Oppenheimer. I mentioned those mega cap tech names, for the most part, higher today. Microsoft, all four report this week. Microsoft up 0.6%. Amazon up by 0.7%. Apple back in the green, up 0.1%. Meta Platforms right now higher by 1%. So again, recapping, stocks higher. S&P up 16, up 0.3%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, great to see you. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Global News. We have a lot to talk about. I hope you had a great weekend, because we have a lot to catch up on here. From the presidential campaign, new numbers coming from Kamala Harris that are eye-popping, $200 million since Joe Biden endorsed her last Sunday. Matter of fact, if you just stop down here and think for a minute about what has happened in the last 2 weeks, you might lose your breath. We're going to be spending some time with Don Levy from Siena College. Remember, he was out with the first numbers on this race last week after Joe Biden dropped out. The sage at Siena College will join with remarkable news as well abroad. And this comes on the heels of Donald Trump speaking at the crypto conference. We were watching an election over the weekend alongside the Olympics. We were watching an election in Venezuela. And now a redhead on the terminal Venezuela's Saab says Machado is suspect of electoral sabotage. We're going to get into this a little bit later on here with real questions about whether Maduro, in fact, won that election fairly. And then there's Israel. This is something that, with all of the other news swirling around here, has not gotten enough attention as Israel weighs its response to this attack at the Golan Heights and whether to open a new front, essentially, or to wage a new war against Hezbollah. And that's where we start our conversation now with Ian Marlowe, Bloomberg's senior reporter with his eye on geopolitics for us. Ian, it's great to see you. Welcome. Antony Blinken warning that this could very quickly spin out of control if Israel, in fact, decides to declare war against Hezbollah. Talk to us about the delicate nature of this moment and when we might know Tel Aviv's and Jerusalem's intentions here.
Yeah, this is something we've seen over the course of the war. Hezbollah on the northern front has been keeping up the pressure on Israel, and this so far both sides have managed to avoid the sort of escalation that everyone has feared, with most of the carnage and tragedy happening down in Gaza. This is obviously an exception to this. Is something I think no one in the U.S., Israel, or probably even Hezbollah and maybe even Iran wanted to see. It's hard to see this strike on kids, 12 dead, being something that's strategic or in Hezbollah's interest. And obviously the last time Israel and Hezbollah tangled, it didn't go well for Hezbollah. It didn't go well for southern Beirut. So this is something that I think the U.S. has been focused on, making sure that Israel keeps a lid on the northern front. There's a lot of heated rhetoric, especially from the far right, who have wanted to expand the war in Gaza to the northern front.
Yes, right.
Obviously, there's a bunch of people displaced from northern Israel, and they want to get those people back. And these types of attacks mean that that's impossible for right now, and that put a lot of pressure on Israel to do something.
Well, you put that in great context. It started to feel like maybe things were cooling on the northern border here, where there's been continuous shelling for months and months. I mean, how you kind of frame what is a war and what is not is its own question right now. But what is Benjamin Netanyahu considering in terms of options? And if, in fact, Israel did make a pronounced strike against Hezbollah, would that not draw Iran into the fight?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's already been a couple of sort of targeted strikes deeper inside Lebanon. Those were sort of aimed at weapons caches and things. It's not clear. I mean, that's obviously not the main response. They're still pledging and looking into some kind of much bigger response. I mean, Israel has a sort of retaliation calculus when it comes to, losing their civilians versus what sort of, fatalities they want to inflict on the enemies around them. And I think that's really worrying for U.S. officials who are trying to keep this, tamped down while they pursue ceasefire negotiations, with Israel and Hamas, which is sort of a separate issue. But right now, I think there's probably going to be a lot of pressure growing on Netanyahu. He himself has, spoken out harshly in terms of the retaliation he's promised.
Yes.
So we're potentially looking at probably airstrikes of some kind, whether they go into Beirut, whether they're aimed at leaders or sort of Hezbollah installations, is kind of yet to be seen. So I think everyone right now is sort of just waiting to see what sort of shape this takes.
Right. The administration, the U.S., has made clear that there are going to be limits to our involvement if, in fact, this does cross over the northern border. John Kirby said earlier today at the White House, I saw a headline on the terminal, that there is no sunlight between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when it comes to our policy in Israel. Joe Biden will still be the president, obviously, for the next many months. If Kamala Harris did win, would we see a difference in this relationship?
It's a really interesting question because the Middle East is the one area of foreign policy that people have pointed out. When you look at Kamala Harris's statements since the war began, she's always been a little bit out in front of where Biden has been with the rhetoric, with the sort of pressure on Israel, sort of emphasizing Palestinian civilian casualties and the rest of it.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to policy, they've been in lockstep, and she's part of the administration. So it's hard to see. At least in the moment, especially with Biden still.
It was an interesting element last week with her saying almost word for word the same things that Joe Biden has been saying, but having them being interpreted very differently from her supporters. I guess it's something that we'll keep an eye on. I'm
Yeah,
glad you
and
confirmed
the Israelis also were very upset by
Isn't
her
that
remarks.
right? Yeah. Even though we've heard the same statements from Joe Biden. Ian Marlowe, covering some pretty heavy stuff for us here. Bloomberg senior reporter. Great to see you, Ian. Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. Something that we're going to keep tabs on for you here, both Venezuela and Israel, as we follow this presidential race coming off another rambunctious weekend. Veep stakes playing out on Sunday morning. Donald Trump promising to fire Gary Gensler in his crypto speech over the weekend. That's something that's been reverberating here a bit in Washington. And then, of course, just the lay of the land. I remind you where we were here. It was what? So today's Monday. 2 weeks ago, J.D. Vance was announced as Donald Trump's running mate. 2 weeks in a day, it was, or I guess 2 days, the assassination attempt. This has been unfolding so quickly. A week ago yesterday, Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race. And now look at the campaign by the numbers here. Kamala Harris pulling in more than $200 million since last Sunday. A weekend fundraiser here helped to do a little more in the Berkshires. But 2/3 of the haul coming from first-time donors. I believe it was 66%. These are remarkable numbers. 170,000 new volunteers since last Sunday. And so we've got a lot of noise out there, and clearly a big shift in the race that we want to talk about with Don Levy. He's back with us, director of the Siena College Research Institute. Don, your poll is still reverberating from last week. You were the first credible poll to come out after Joe Biden dropped out of the race. As an experienced political hand and pollster like yourself, are you amazed by what's happened in the last week? Put it in context for us.
Well, everything changed very quickly. I mean, we immediately went into the field last Monday to get a pulse on the nation. And certainly we see an amazing change. You know, what had pulled to about a 6-point advantage for former President Trump over President Biden is now really a dead heat. You know, we looked at it in a national poll. We have Trump up by 1 over Harris. However, it's even closer than that when we look at voters on their first pass, when we ask them the question, and we have RFK and other third-party candidates in the race, actually Harris is up by a point. So right now, this national race has turned into one that was really looking like Trump had a very significant advantage into one that's clearly a toss-up. And in fact, what we saw in our 3 days of polling last week, that as each day went on, Harris picked up a little bit more steam. So clearly, the Democrats are very excited about being excited when they had been really, really quite unhappy with the Biden candidacy. In fact, when we asked voters, did the Democrats make the right decision? Did Biden make the right decision pulling out of the race? 87% of voters said absolutely that was the right decision.
That's incredible. You and I have talked a lot about the double haters. They're a much smaller group all of a sudden now, aren't they?
Really, the double haters have shrunk. They're down now. When you look at double haters of both Trump and Harris, it's only 8% of voters. I've got a new group for you. We're going to call them the persuadables. We talked about persuadables before. Those are voters who do not say either Trump or Harris on the first time we offer them the horse race. 13%, about 1 out of every 8 voters fall into this persuadable. When you look at the folks who are not persuadable, right now in our most recent national poll, 84% of voters are locked in. Their mind is made up. So we're down now to between 13 and 16% of voters who either may not show up or truly are the persuadables. At this point in time, a slight advantage for Trump over Harris amongst these persuadable voters.
Amazing. This is really good stuff. That was 1 in 8, right? The persuadables?
Right, 1 in 8.
Fascinating to hear this. Now,
you look at these persuadables, and we ask them, can you assess these two candidates on a series of attributes? Their ability to unify the country, their temperament, their intelligence, which one is a stronger leader? And there you see that these persuadables are struggling a little bit. Far and away, they see former President Trump as a stronger leader. Certainly, that's going to be something that I'm sure that he will stress in his campaign. He sees that as a strength, and voters see that as a strength. Interestingly, on the issue of intelligence, while persuadables and voters in general feel as though both candidates are intelligent, they give the nod on intelligence to Kamala Harris rather than to Donald Trump. Harris also has small advantages over Trump on empathy, her ability to care about people like the voters, and also in having the appropriate temperament to be the effective president. So clearly, Harris has jumped up to be a very formidable candidate. In fact, we saw Trump get a bounce in his favorability also in this poll, up about a net 6 favorability. So despite the Trump bump, Harris clearly has caught him and pulled even.
Wow. All right. Don Levy with us from Siena. There's something called momentum that she's experiencing, this sort of campaign on a speedboat. It's amazing how much has happened in the last week. And while the momentum is taking place, Don Levy, how do you poll that?
Well, I guess the answer to that is again and again.
Will you be in the field more often? Is that the answer?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to be in the field quite soon now, going to take a look at the key battleground states. And then typically we see a candidate get a bump after a convention. I think former President Trump got that. I think the assassination attempt yielded a slight bump. So it was just remarkable to see Harris, jump into the race and pull even. It's likely that Harris may very well see a bump when we go to the Democratic convention. Then we really get down to the nitty gritty as we hit Labor Day and go to that really sprint to the finish line where we'll be polling almost nonstop from Labor Day until the election.
Understood. And that's how you capture, I guess, a moving target in that case. I don't know what they're going to call it, Don. Kamala-mentum? I haven't heard anyone go for that yet. But, in that world, there's a question about the honeymoon. I think Politico calls it the sugar rush this morning. How much time does Kamala Harris have to enjoy the good feels in the media and by her supporters?
Well, I think what we see is her base is extremely excited, committed. The fundraising, as you point out, has been dramatic. Now we're going to start going to war over these persuadables. Both camps are going to try to paint Harris with a certain brush. And we're going to have to take a look at these persuadables, these independents in the swing states to see which way they end up going. That's going to be the ultimate decider of this election. Still, at this point in time, the momentum of the Harris campaign is impressive. That the Democrats had a campaign really that was, maybe to use a bad metaphor, on life support. Now it's an entirely new campaign, and I think that this momentum will ease, and then the true battle over the persuadables will take place from Labor Day right until the election.
Wow, the persuadables. I could see that being like a new streaming series or something, Don. It's time for your $1 million moment. Great to see you. Welcome back. We're always watching what Siena is up to, and of course, the great Don Levy. Thank you, Don, for helping our way through this campaign. Siena College Research Institute director. They work with the New York Times, and this was the poll that made the ground shake last week. We'll have our own this week, by the way, the swing state poll that we're going to be talking to you a lot more about. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with breaking news from Israel, from Venezuela, and from here in the U.S. on the campaign. And to think, we've got a Fed meeting this week on top of it. Stay with us on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. This is Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Big tech is climbing. Small caps taking a hit after rallying as much as 10% in July. The Russell 2000 right now down 0.7%, but stocks are higher ahead of major central bank decisions this week. The Fed Wednesday, key economic data, the jobs report Friday, and earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. S&P right now very close to session highs, up 24. That is a gain of 0.4%. The Dow little changed, up just under 0.1%, up 24 points, while NASDAQ higher now by 119, up by 0.7%. 10-year yield, 4.17%. The 2-year, 4.38%. Spot gold down $10 the ounce, down 0.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2%, $75.58 a barrel. Bitcoin down 0.2%, 67,841 on Bitcoin. Guardant Health shares are higher after U.S. regulators approved the company's blood test for colorectal cancer as a primary screening tool at a time when the disease is rising at a worrying rate in younger Americans. Shares of Guardant Health, they're up now by just over 3%. So again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P up 23 right now, a gain of 0.4%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Your host, here's Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. We'll keep tabs on the markets with Charlie throughout our 2 hours, as we do each day here live from Washington, talking politics in the throes of an historic time, I'll tell you. And it just seems to get more heady by the day here as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump now face off in a whole new presidential contest that's going to introduce a running mate at some point, they say, in the next week or so, as we head for what is likely a virtual nomination for Kamala Harris, and then the big full smash in Chicago, the DNC. Maybe I shouldn't call it that, the Democratic National Convention, which will be hopefully peaceful and productive. Then the big sprint to November. And as we talk now, we're kind of establishing the lines here and the issues that we're going to be following over the course of the campaign and reestablishing some of them after Joe Biden dropped down. As we add crypto to the pile here, we haven't really talked a lot about crypto by way of the presidential race, but Donald Trump would like us to. He wants to make America the crypto capital of the world. And he spoke at this crypto conference over the weekend with his eyes on the chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler. Here's Donald Trump from the weekend.
On day one, I will fire Gary Gensler. I will appoint a new SEC chairman who believes America should build the future, not block the future. Upon taking office, I will immediately appoint a Bitcoin and crypto presidential advisory council.
And why not a reserve of Bitcoin for the nation? This is where we start today with Laura Davison, who has been working 24 hours a day for a couple of weeks now as Bloomberg's politics editor. How would you like that job? It's great to see you. You're doing great, by the way. Thank God for you.
Thanks for having me.
And now we add crypto to the pile because you want to start covering the crypto world, but it's actually going to become a pretty big part of the conversation here as we, consider the impact of J.D. Vance and a former president who was at one time anti-crypto. He said it was based on thin air. Now wants to be the crypto capital. I said the world. I believe he said the planet. And the Bitcoin superpower of the world, he says, will get it done.
So this is a real strategy shift from the Trump campaign. Starting about 2 or 3 months ago, we saw them start to, trot out some different pro-crypto ideas. There's two main reasons for this. One is this is one way that the campaign sees as growing the base of voters, people who are really into crypto, super passionate about it. It's their number one issue, but may not otherwise be plugged into the political system.
Yeah.
Number two is that the crypto industry has a ton of money. We remember from back in 2022, 2020, Sam Bankman-Fried was giving a bunch of money to Democrats. A lot of this money is now going to Republicans. There's a big super PAC for the industry that has at least $200 million in it. And so the Trump campaign sees that as a way to help fund their campaign and bring along a group of voters who are super, super passionate about this one topic.
Did Elon get to him?
Elon has also been talking with him about, he's been one of his main crypto advisors there as well. We also have reported that Elon Musk is now giving, millions of dollars a month to a pro-Trump super PAC. So there's a lot in the ecosystem here propelling Trump, and this total strategy shift going from, crypto is bad, it's a scam, to, I want to be the pro-crypto superpower in the world.
So it's not so much the size of the community, as we hear from the crypto trading universe frequently here at Bloomberg. It's about the wealth of the industry, the potential to raise money here for the Trump campaign.
Yes, and there's a bunch of money there, and you see kind of how Trump is talking to the crypto industry. He said, I don't want to have regulators that hate your industry. I want to hire regulators who love your industry, and so that is music to their ears when they hear that. Of look, we will get all behind this guy. We want to have the regulations that we want. Obviously, he mentioned that he wanted to fire Gary Gensler, who would have at least another 18 months or so in a second Trump administration.
And Bitcoin's down today, James. Look at that. I thought we were onto something here. Is it just a Bitcoin thing? Or is the former president into Dogecoin? Is it Ether? Does it matter?
He hasn't really been platform specific on that. He of course kind of first dipped his toe into this doing the NFTs that were of himself. Right. So he has sort of played there, but kind of like the way that Trump gets engaged in some of these policy issues, it's not because it's something he cares about himself. It's because he sees the political advantage, like how he's really appealed to evangelical Christians. I'm not sure that Trump is going to church every Sunday, but he realizes how important it is to be allied with those groups.
Still above $67,000. That's not too bad. So we're talking money here. Let's talk about Kamala Harris for a minute. The headlines are eye-popping, as I said before, $200 million in a week. And then you read further to learn that 2/3 of those people are first-time donors. How do you get your head around that?
So that is a massive number. $200 million would be a really, really good monthly raise. Yeah. She did it in 6 or 7 days or so. So that is really incredible. It shows that one, there was a lot of money and a lot of people who were on the sidelines when it was Joe Biden at the top of the ticket who are now coming forward. Second, it shows that these people have money that they want to give. There's enthusiasm there. The question is this a one-time blip? She's going to need a lot more than $200 million to get herself to November, or is this a sustained thing that is suddenly the Democratic energy, the donor money, all of that is lining up behind her?
And that's what gets us to the idea of a honeymoon here. But even if it is one, she's got a couple of weeks potentially playing in her favor in terms of the news cycle, right? We've got another week here. We get a running mate announced. Then it's on to Chicago. A lot of attention paid to the DNC if they play it right. So this could be a profitable period of time for her.
Really, and all of what Trump is doing is talking about Harris. So it's all about Harris right now, and it's largely playing to her favor. He's still testing out sort of what kind of attack lines he wants to use. And in some of these cases, these things have really trended into sort of the sexist or racist territory. Trump hasn't said this himself, but allies have called her a DEI hire. Sure. And that has the potential to really backfire for him and for, the people he wants to reach. He wants to reach black men. He wants to reach Hispanic men. Playing in these sort of, racist tropes could be very harmful to Republicans.
We've talked about that a bit here, and the efforts by some, including the Speaker of the House, to tamp down that kind of talk because of the potential for it to backfire. She's going to be eulogizing Sheila Jackson Lee this week. That's the potential for a moment for her, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is a chance for her to really kind of show herself as a presidential candidate. She really has the best of both worlds here. If Biden is doing the job of being president and sort of able to do that day-to-day work, but she's able to be a figurehead for a lot of these things, like meeting with Netanyahu last week, eulogizing Sheila Jackson Lee at the Congresswoman's funeral later this week, and then spend a lot of the rest of her time out on the campaign trail. She's got a busy schedule. She's got to vet VP candidates all within something that would take months. She's doing in a handful of days.
So give me what you got on this. Bloomberg reporting over the weekend that it's down to 3, and it's 3 names that we've been hearing about. We started with a short list, and it got a little bit long. Now it's short again. Okay, here, if you're with us on YouTube, you're looking at this. Mark Kelly's still in the mix. Governor Shapiro, Governor Walz of Minnesota. Is anyone leading the pack here, and how did we get down to 3?
So these 3 are folks that have nationwide appeal. 2 of those people, Kelly and Shapiro, are directly from swing states. Walz, Minnesota is not really a swing state. The Trump campaign would like it to be, but it hasn't been for years. But he has a lot of appeal. He's sort of an interesting character, someone kind of like a Sherrod Brown, who has appeal in sort of the blue wall states, but also has appeal among progressives. He's taken a more progressive stance, but he's still
And he's got a personality, as we saw yesterday morning, right?
He's got a personality.
He came up with the weird thing.
Yes.
Is he the reason why all this weird stuff is?
He's the one who's really popularized this. Just to catch listeners up of Kamala Harris has come out and saying the weird attack line is what she's used on both Trump and Vance. It's been kind of an effective line for her, especially with some of the comments J.D. Vance has made about Mountain Dew being racist or going after childless cat ladies.
Yeah.
She's kind of able to sort of distance herself and stay above the fray, being like, that's weird, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Unless weird, as I said Friday, becomes the new deplorable. All these things can cut both ways, right? Talk to me about Joe Biden, though. He's in Texas today. He's going to be rolling out his new ideas about the Supreme Court, term limits, an ethics code. What's going on? After all the EOs, the executive orders that he has rolled out here, no one seems to think, even Mike Johnson says this is DOA in the House. Is he cooking up a campaign issue for Kamala Harris today? What's behind it?
This is helpful to set this up and remind Democrats, look, the Supreme Court is one of the things at stake in this election. Joe Biden is also on full legacy building mode. He is, what are the things he wants to work on, post-presidency? What are the issues he wants to have to be the focus of his presidential library and, whatever role he plays in the Democratic Party going forward. So you're starting to see some of the stuff that was not worth his time or the political bandwidth when he was the candidate. Now he can kind of be the champion for those issues.
So he's sort of free to say whatever he wants. He's got lame duck status, and he can effectively not only build his own legacy, but campaign for Kamala Harris all at once. Is he suddenly her greatest asset?
He could be for the people, for the diehard, Democratic supporters that he needs, for people, sort of within the establishment who these are important issues. He knows the progressive leaders that care deeply about this, as well as the donors who said, hey, why haven't you done anything about this? He could now say, yes, sure, no problem. Let me get this out right now.
Amazing. We'll be keeping tabs on the address later. It should be around 4:30, 5 o'clock Eastern time. Do you have a gut check on timing for a running mate? Does she need to do this before the virtual nomination or any time before Chicago, or what do we think?
She doesn't necessarily have to do it before the virtual nomination, which may be this week, but August 7th. That is the drop-dead deadline for a VP pick. So Wednesday of next week, mark your calendars. I'll see you back here.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, you're coming on, I hope. Fascinating stuff, as always. We learn from Laura Davison every time we talk. Thanks for being with us. Good luck on this Monday. Look for her work, of course, on the terminal and online. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us after we get you up to date on world and national news. For that, we turn to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. President Biden today will propose term limits for Supreme Court justices and push for a constitutional amendment that would override the court's recent decision that the president enjoys some immunity for official acts. Biden will outline his proposed reforms in Austin this afternoon during a speech at the LBJ Presidential Library. Vice President Kamala Harris zeroing in now on a group of potential running mates as she faces a 2-week dash to make the biggest decision of her nascent presidential bid. Harris is considering a wide range of vice presidential candidates from the Democratic Party's bench, although people familiar with the process say a short list has emerged, including 3 elected officials with nationwide appeal: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. There are renewed fears of a full-scale conflict between Israel and Hezbollah militants in Lebanon as Secretary of State Antony Blinken continues the push for a ceasefire in Gaza. On the sidelines of meetings in Tokyo with counterparts from Japan, Australia, and India, Blinken said the ceasefire proposal remains on the table.
We're grateful, I must say, on the part of the United States, grateful to our partners for the strong support for the ceasefire proposal that President Biden put forward, and we're working every single day to bring that across the finish line.
Israel is blaming Lebanon-based Hezbollah militants for a rocket attack that killed 12 on Saturday. And the medal count in the Paris Summer Games. France is out front with 13 medals. The U.S. has 12. There's a 4-way tie for third place with 9 medals. And China and Korea have the most gold medals at 5 apiece. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks advancing ahead of major central bank decisions. Federal Reserve Wednesday, economic data on Friday with the jobs report, and of course earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. Right now we have got the S&P up 21 to 5480, a gain of 0.4%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 13, little change there. On NASDAQ higher by 112, up by 0.7%. The NASDAQ 100 index doing a little bit better, up now by 0.8%. 10-year at 4.17%. The 2-year yield 4.38%. Spot gold lower by $9 the ounce, down 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.3%. Brent, the global benchmark, below $80 a barrel, 79.42 for a barrel of Brent, down now by 2.1%. The Labor Department will be issuing its monthly employment report this week, and it could be somewhat lackluster. With that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Bloomberg Economics says Hurricane Beryl, as well as intense heat in many parts of the U.S., may have had an impact on July payrolls. Forecasts point to a gain of 175,000 jobs, the smallest increase since April. Friday's report is also expected to show unemployment leveled off at 4.1% in July, the highest since 2022. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
So a busy week ahead for economic data. Also a very busy week ahead for earnings. Results from Microsoft, Meta Platforms, Apple, and Amazon will be crucial after an underwhelming start of the mega cap reporting season. Microsoft up now by 0.9%. Amazon gaining 1%. Apple up just about 0.4%. Meta Platforms, parent of Instagram and Facebook, up by 1.8%. So again, recapping, stocks are higher, just about the best level of the day on the S&P, up now by 24, up 0.4%. Balance of Power continues, the Monday edition. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much for keeping your eyes on the markets for us. If you're getting the message here, this is a pretty pivotal week all the way around when it comes to the economy, when it comes to interest rates, when it comes to the markets, and of course, yes, politics. This is a big one. And it's not just the earnings that Charlie's talking about here. We've got a Fed meeting, of course, that we're going to be talking on Wednesday about the potential for a cut in September, according to great work and analysis from over the weekend from Bloomberg Economics. You can expect that to be telegraphed on Wednesday, which is partly why the markets are moving on this. We're going to hear from the president a little later on today about the Supreme Court. We'll talk to Rick and Jeannie about that. But we've got trouble in Venezuela that I have to point you to here. In a breaking story on the terminal, Venezuela naming opposition leader Maria Corina Machado as a key suspect now in its investigation of alleged electoral sabotage. There was an important election yesterday in Venezuela. If you were busy watching the Olympics, this was happening too. Machado among the suspects named by the public prosecutor in a news conference today. President Maduro, of course, Nicolas Maduro, who was named the winner of the election in a result that has met wide skepticism from the international community, said the cyber attacks delayed the results here, delayed the totals. So Maduro declared the winner again with results that the U.S. is very skeptical about here. Anthony Blinken says the U.S. government has, quote, serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. Maria Corina Machado, who I mentioned, the opposition leader, had said before this development, "We won and the whole world knows it," declaring the result, quote, impossible. There's going to be a lot more coming on this, I can assure you. As we wait to hear from President Biden, he's leaving the bubble today and heading for Texas, where he's going to be talking about the Supreme Court. And one of our top stories today that we want to get into here with the panel, calling for term limits, calling for a code of ethics. Joe Biden on the court, even as the Speaker of the House calls it DOA. Joe Biden writing in an op-ed, if you're with us on YouTube, you can see here in the New York Times, "My plan to reform the Supreme Court and ensure no president is above the law. 18-year term limits, a new code of ethics." And we'll be rolling this out at the LBJ Presidential Library in Texas. Let's bring them in. Our panel is with us, our signature panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie, what's your thought here Is Joe Biden trying to reform the court or make this a campaign issue for Kamala Harris?
I have to think realistically it's the latter. Anybody who talks about constitutional amendments at this point in this country, I have difficulty taking that idea serious, except if it's in a political context. And the reason is this. Justice Scalia a long time ago said accurately, 2% of our population can thwart an amendment. And then he added, it should be hard, but not that hard to have a constitutional amendment pass. But that just tells you why, since the Civil War, we've only had 12, 2 of which canceled each other out. So anytime somebody talks seriously about an amendment, you have to question whether, in fact, they are doing it for political reasons or because it can really pass. And let's not forget, the last author of our last amendment was James Madison, and he had been dead for over 200 years. It's just not in the offing. And so that's where I come down, not just on poor Joe Biden, but on anybody who suggests they're going to act a constitutional amendment.
All right, so reality check courtesy of Jeannie. Rick, is it smart politics, though, to put this on the campaign trail to give Kamala Harris this one to run with?
You know, I doubt it, Joe. I don't think this is a situation where the president and the candidate were in concert. First of all, if he was doing this for Kamala Harris and thought it was a good idea, he'd have her announce it, not him. He is like kryptonite to voters. I mean, you know, he's not the guy you want endorsing your policy proposals and then going out and campaigning against Donald Trump on them. You know, that's kind of a, you got to look at the rearview mirror when you're thinking about Joe Biden in this election cycle. So I think this is more retribution. He's mad at the Supreme Court. They've undermined a lot of his initiatives, and they just gave Donald Trump presidential immunity that he totally disagrees with. And, you know, the whole idea of a constitutional amendment to put him, you know, to take immunity away from the president is, sure, you can go out and make that a political issue and campaign on it, but I don't think it has anything to do with this election. And so I just think this is one of these things where you have to be alert and say, is the White House getting in the way of a perfectly good campaign right now? And if so, let them do it after the election. Don't let them do it today.
Wow. Okay. So not an asset in Rick's view, Jeannie, but is anyone even listening? Who's paying attention to this today?
You know, the reality is anytime you talk about term limits, whether it's for Congress, quite frankly, or in this case for the Supreme Court, that is a popular idea with many Americans. And so I do see this as it could be retribution for his frustration with the Supreme Court for sure. But I do think it's also a play to the base. Listen, in 2020, Democrats were pushing Joe Biden to pack the court, something that he has long said he didn't want to do. And so he did the Washington thing. He set up a commission. They released a report. Nobody talked about it. Now that he is out, I think he is moving in the direction of where the base of the Democratic Party is right now. They feel that this court has gotten too political. They don't trust it. And so what do they want to see? They want to see ethics reforms. They want to see term limits. They want to see packing the court. And so two of those three he's taking, and he is going to talk about. So I do think this is a play for the base. Whether it in fact gets done, I agree with the speaker on this. It is dead on arrival. Not only that, but term limits via Congress is something I don't see as constitutional. The Constitution says you serve in good behavior. That's always meant lifetime. So I think that would be a real problem to try to do this via Congress. And two constitutional amendments are not in the offing.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump's playing to the base as well. He was out over the weekend not only promising to fire Gary Gensler at the crypto Bitcoin summit, but Rick, he spoke to the Believers Summit, it's called, in West Palm Beach. And his comments to the Christians in the room, who we refer to as his Christians, got a lot of people upset on social media. And I'm just curious, I would like to hear from both of you on this, because we've heard this idea before from Donald Trump, just I guess in a slightly different way. He's talked about, you know, the idea of serving 3 or 4 terms or whatever. But in this case, he suggested this would be the last time that they needed to vote. Listen to what Donald Trump said to the Believers Convention.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Okay, my beautiful Christians. Rick, what's he saying here? A lot of people were upset because they thought he was saying, you know, the whole dictator, not for a day, but indefinitely. After this, you'll never need to vote again because he's never going to leave. How did you interpret that?
No, I mean, I think that's overblown. He's selling to the Christian conservative community that I don't have to be like you. I just have to deliver for you. And when you look at his first 4 years in office, he delivered for this community, right? They got what they wanted on the Supreme Court. They got what they wanted with federal judges. They got what they wanted with abortion policy in the administration. I mean, you know, they got everything they wanted. I'm a little surprised that he doesn't say, I've already delivered for you, and now you got to vote for me and you know, because I did it. But that's what he's talking about. I'm going to give you everything you want. It's pay to play for, you know, religious conservatives. And, you know, elect me and you won't need anything anymore because I will have delivered everything you want. That's how I took it. That's really what the man is made of. And so I'm not getting excited about this is a subliminal message to all the, you know, authoritarians in the United States to support him.
All right, Jeannie, quote, you got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again, he said. We'll have it fixed so good, you're not going to have to. What do you think he meant?
You know, I think that Democrats and never Trumpers have to understand that there's nothing that Trump supporters like better than to see them freak out and get all upset about these things that they take as tongue-in-cheek. And I took this as tongue-in-cheek. He is saying, vote for me, I'll do such a great job. You will be on your way and you won't need to think about it, right? And so is it irresponsible? Is it unbecoming? In my personal opinion, sure. But it is what his base likes to hear when people get all riled up, oh, he's an authoritarian in waiting. I think they should recognize what the base is hearing, which is that this is funny. This guy is hysterical. What leader do we know who says you don't have to vote again, right? So I would take it with a grain of salt and focus on what he has done. Let's look at who his policies have benefited. Let's talk about that and not about his jokes, which I'll borrow the word of the week or the campaign. They are weird to me. I don't get them, but so be it.
Boy, you brought us there. I heard the word weird a couple of times on Sunday morning television. Bloomberg says it's down to 3, Rick. You've got the governors of Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and then the senator from Arizona. Does Kamala Harris make news on a running mate this week?
I doubt it. They've got a process they got to go through. She's not under the gun to announce anything until by the day before the nominating call on August 7th. So yes. You know this is a great week for them to study their naval, figure out, get the polling data back. Remember, they've only probably just been in the field with these guys for a week to test whether or not they move the dial in any of these states that they're from, or any other states or any other constituencies that they might think are important. And then they got to sit down and think about it and analyze it. So, yeah, I would be stunned if they have an announcement out this week.
Jeannie, we've only got about a minute left, and we'll have a little more time for this next hour. But when you look at these 3, you've got the potential for a swing state with Shapiro in Pennsylvania and Kelly in Arizona. What does Walz bring in Minnesota? Why is it this 3?
You know, I think he does bring that, voice of the blue-collar Midwest. I know some people describe him as a little bit more liberal, but I think he made a good case for himself this weekend. He's not in my top 3, but I know he is there in the Midwest. And so as a governor who has performed well and who is supported by his constituents, he would definitely be someone to think about. I tend to like the other 2 a little bit better, but he is a Minnesota governor of note.
Well, that's for sure. The auditions were really something on Sunday morning to watch them all out there. And Tim Walz did apparently start the weird thing. He coined the weird thing. Maybe that's the moment of the campaign. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Our panel's going to stay with us for hour 2. Always glad to say. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. And Kaylee Lyons is back with us today in the nation's capital as we welcome our television audience. Coming up next, a conversation with Mick Mulvaney. He's going to be with us at the table here at the threshold of a whole new campaign. Stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. We've got a lot more ahead on Balance of Power, live from Washington.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Joe Biden calls for term limits on the Supreme Court. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Nice to see you back here today in the Capitol. We're going to be hearing from the president a little bit later on today from Texas as Kamala Harris, Kaylee, spends time counting money after an historic round of fundraising.
Yeah, remember, it has been just over 1 week since Kamala Harris officially launched her own presidential campaign, and already that campaign has raised more than $200 million. And perhaps what's even more astounding than that figure in and of itself is that 66% of those donors were giving money for the first time this cycle. Speaks to the amount of energy that her candidacy seems to have inspired.
2/3. It is incredible. And a number like that, they would be celebrating for a month, never mind a week. But it really helps us also stop for just a moment, Kaylee, and consider what we've been through just in the last 2 weeks. 2 Saturdays ago, on our way to Milwaukee, we learned about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and what has happened since then. J.D. Vance. Of course, Joe Biden dropping out of the race, Kamala Harris becoming the nominee in waiting, and then numbers like this. It's remarkable how quick it's all taken place.
Yeah, and of course, there is still more that has yet to take place. By August 7th, Kamala Harris needs to decide who her vice presidential pick would be. How will it be someone who counters J.D. Vance or the Trump-Vance ticket overall? We still have a lot to learn. And of course, in the meantime, we still have a sitting president of the United States who is continuing to do his job and trying to cement that legacy, including pushing for these reforms.
Yeah, we'll hear from him a little bit later on. 4:30, 5 o'clock Eastern time is what we expect from Texas. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House correspondent, will join us in a moment with more on that. And Kaylee, we're joined today by Mick Mulvaney in studio with his view on the presidential campaign.
Yep, of course, former acting chief of staff in the Trump White House. So a lot is still ahead this hour. But we start, as always, with a look at the markets. Charlie Pellet has that for us up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And good day to you both. We are looking at a mixed market right now. Most stocks are higher. Let's begin with the S&P 500 index. That benchmark up by about 0.4%, higher by 20, 54.79. The Dow has been struggling to find direction. Yes, it is up now. Little change, swinging between gains and losses, but up now by about 3 points. NASDAQ higher by 99, up by 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 0.7%, but a retreat for small caps with the Russell 2000 index lower now by 1%. 10-year 4.17%, the 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold is declining today. Spot gold down 0.4%, 23.78 for an ounce of the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude tumbling 2.1%, 75.56 a barrel. And Brent crude, the global benchmark, trading back below $80 a barrel. Brent down by 2%. Morgan Stanley chief U.S. economist Ellen Zentner leaving her post to lead a newly created team within the bank's investment wing. According to an internal memo seen by Bloomberg, Zentner will lead the new thematic and macro investing team at Morgan Stanley's Global Investment Office beginning August 1st. Morgan Stanley shares, they are trading lower right now. We got Morgan Stanley down by roughly 1.5%. So again, recapping here, the Dow swinging between gains and losses. Little change right now. The S&P up 20, up 0.4%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, broadcasting live from Washington, where the president, Joe Biden, has just departed from. He's on his way to Texas, where he will give remarks later today about reforms he would like to see to the Supreme Court. In part, it's a call for term limits on Supreme Court justices. He also would like Congress to enact a formal ethics code for those justices. But he's looking for an amendment on presidential immunity. This, of course, is in the aftermath of something that, if you could believe it, also happened earlier this month when the Supreme Court decided that Donald Trump had partial immunity as president for official acts taken in office. And we know how Joe Biden reacted on the day that decision came down.
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years. But any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent.
And so here we are today with Joe Biden, as Kaylee mentioned, on his way to Texas to roll out these proposed reforms, writing an op-ed in the Washington Post To accompany the visit, quote, "My plan to reform the Supreme Court and ensure no president is above the law," unquote. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House editor and correspondent, joins us for more on this. Jordan, what's with the timing? Obviously, a very sensitive moment on the campaign trail. Kamala Harris is trying to get her act together here. The Speaker of the House says this is DOA. Why now, and who's listening?
Well, if you remember, Joe Biden was supposed to go down to the LBJ library a couple weeks ago, but then he came down with COVID, and that's what sort of precipitated the end of his presidential campaign. So this is a bit of a rain date for that. But look, now at this point, he's pressing something that is supported by many people in the Democratic base. A lot of voters don't like what the Supreme Court has done. The Supreme Court obviously giving Trump partial immunity, going back a couple years, stripping nationwide abortion rights. These are things that Democrats have been running against, and so this allows the president to amplify that. And now for Joe Biden, not facing re-election, it's a chance to cement some kind of legacy defining mission here, even though it's unlikely to happen this year.
Well, as we consider the unlikely chances of this actually happening, Jordan, it also raises the question if there are other avenues potentially that the president would try to pursue with executive privilege to get around Congress who may not be on board with this, or is really his only hope if he wants to see these reforms done, legislation?
It seems like legislation is really the only avenue, not to mention a constitutional amendment for the immunity section. And some legal scholars believe you might actually need a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on Supreme Court justices. So that's a pretty high bar to clear, especially in this polarized country. But if you look at it in a different way, even though it's likely not going to happen this year, this is Joe Biden, kind of changing the terms of the debate here. The Supreme Court reform, once a position that was championed by the left wing of his party, is now being picked up by the president, who has positioned himself at kind of the center of the party. So now he's defining this as a mainstream position within the Democratic Party going forward.
How does this help Kamala Harris on the campaign trail, if at all, Jordan?
It definitely complements her message on abortion rights. I mean, she has really picked up the mantle on that issue from Biden, who really was kind of uncomfortable talking about it throughout his career. And so this sort of complements that in a way to say, look, we've seen the Supreme Court justices who've made these controversial decisions get tied up in ethical scandals. Clarence Thomas, for example, Samuel Alito with these reports about the flags being flown at his home, and so it provides some fodder for their supporters to say, hey, we know that you're angry about all of the stuff the Supreme Court does. Here's what we're doing about it.
All right, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jordan Fabian, thank you so much as we continue to assess what continues to be a history-making news cycle when it comes to both the current president and, of course, his vice president, who is running to replace him come January of 2025. And, of course, the other candidate in this race is former President Donald Trump. And joining us now here in studio, someone who worked in the Trump White House as acting chief of staff. Mick Mulvaney is with us. He, of course, also is co-founder of the Freedom Caucus, is a former congressman from South Carolina, former director of the OMB. We all know you have a very long resume. Mick, great to see you in person. Not much going on these days since the last time we caught up with you. It has been a while. So much has happened in such a very short period of time, including for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Not just surviving an assassination attempt, then selecting J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate. Happened before.
Busy couple weeks.
Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. Knowing what you know of Donald Trump, do you think he regrets that choice or would have decided differently if he had the knowledge we now have?
Listen, I'll preface this by saying, look, anybody who says now they know exactly what's going to happen has been proven wrong, right? Because we're way through the looking glass now. I mean, no one ever expected any of this. So if you sit here and say, well, absolutely X, Y, Z, I could be proven entirely wrong tomorrow. So with that caveat, I don't think there's much chance they're even having this conversation. Here's why. Let's say that I'm Donald Trump and I'm thinking about Joe Matthew for position X. Kayleigh, what do you think about Joe? What do you think about Joe? He's a good guy. What do you hear about him, okay? If he's asking those questions of somebody that he hasn't hired yet, it means he's thinking about hiring them. If he's asking similar questions, Kayleigh, what do you think about Joe? What kind of a job is he doing? What are you hearing? And he's already hired that person. That means he's thinking about firing that person. Okay, that's how the dynamic works.
Sure.
I've not heard any of that out of the Trump team right now. Trump is not asking people what do they think about J.D. Vance. How's he doing? I do have some questions about whether or not the vetting team knew about these things that we're now hearing about.
Like the childless cat lady thing.
Exactly. Did they hear about that? And listen, there's a pretty good chance they did. They got a pretty good social media team, and they probably just didn't care. Again, J.D. was a selection born of supreme confidence. They thought they were going to win. They still think they're going to win, and they just wanted somebody that Trump likes to work with. And they didn't want to worry about any of the dynamics of picking up states or demographics. It's the only person, remember, that he can't fire after the election. Cabinet secretaries, chiefs of staff, whatever you can get rid of. You can't get rid of your VP. So they took him because they liked him, and they still think they do. So, look, he could get fired tomorrow. I get it, but I'm just not hearing it.
Well, so what's your view on the way this race has changed? Don Levy from Siena was on with us earlier, telling a remarkable story about momentum in the polls. It's been a game changer, certainly coming even with Donald Trump here in the states that matter. $200 million in a week, getting enormous amounts of free media. Should Donald Trump be more worried than he was a week ago?
More worried. I think if he was going to waltz into the White House against Joe Biden.
So how do you describe it now? Is it still his to lose?
I think I went from an 80-20 kind of race to a 52-48 kind of race. Keep in mind, and there's an axiom in this business that you're never really more popular than the day you announce you're running for office. And it's all downhill after that. In fact, that happened to Kamala Harris back in 2020. She had that fabulous rollout. Where was it, Oakland or San Francisco? I can't remember. And I remember watching her on TV going, those are Trump-type rallies. That's a tremendous rollout for a campaign. This is when she was running for president. And then 6 weeks later, she's gone before Iowa even opened up. So you're never more popular than you are in day one. You expect a bounce. Look, I give the Democrats credit. I never expected them to get their act together this quickly. I was sort of, buying popcorn and getting ready to hunker down in front of the Democrat National Convention and just watching the fireworks, thinking it was going to be a wide open sort of rodeo. It's not. And you give them credit. They have done better than I think a lot of folks, including some Democrats, expected them to do. But this race is far from over, and I think you're going to hear a lot of things about Kamala Harris from Republicans over the next 99 days.
Well, so as we think about the excitement her candidacy seems to have generated, to Joe's point, a big part of this is money. The Kamala Harris campaign has raised more than $200 million. A lot of that from first-time small-dollar donors. We aren't necessarily hearing much fundraising news out of the Trump campaign to counter that. And I just wonder how you think about the cash part of the equation here and the ability to spend money in the states that matter.
Yeah, look, it's no question about it. It's absolutely critical. It's probably more critical down ballot than it is for anything else. But at the end of the day, I mean, look, Trump had a great news cycle. I think the last time they put out numbers, how he outraised Biden. Kamala Harris has had a good number this time. Both of these teams are going to have enough money to do everything that they want to do. Now, down ballot's a different story. So if you're Hakeem Jeffries or you're Michael Johnson, you're fighting and slugging it out for every single seat in the House for majority down there. If there's enough money is a question that still remains. But at the top of the ticket, they're going to have enough dough to do what they want. And keep on, you never know, is money that comes in today money that was going to come in tomorrow, or is it really new money? Is it just money that came in earlier? Was it money that was held back last time? There's all sorts of variables when it comes to money raising. But listen, no one's going poor in this race, that's for sure.
That is for sure. I don't know if the campaign cares at all who Kamala Harris is going to run with. I suspect that there's some consideration there. But if you take the red hat off for a minute, who do you think Kamala Harris, if it's down to this three, does she go with somebody like a Rust Belt governor? Does it need to be a swing state? Why are we talking about governor of Minnesota, for instance?
You fall back on the basics, right? On how you usually pick a vice president. You pick a vice president based upon a need for your campaign.
Yes.
Is it money, which is why Reagan took Bush? Is it expertise, which is why Dukakis took Benson? Is it a swing state, which is why Romney took Ryan? Didn't work out that well, but that was the pick. I think you're back in that world right
swing
now.
State.
It's a swing state type of thing.
So
right?
Shapiro then, right?
So, well, no, because you've got, what are the swing states?
Yeah.
Shapiro's on the list.
Well, you could do Kelly in Arizona.
Kelly in Arizona. Whitmer in Michigan. Walz in Minnesota is a state they'd love to lock up. No question about it. And if they really
so
think
there is
weak,
a geographic advantage to Walz in Minnesota.
Absolutely. Much more so, say, than Cooper in North Carolina, who I really don't think the Democrats think they can win. And Bashir, who's a very talented guy, a Democrat who won in a red state, whose name has sort of fallen off the map already because it's not a swing state. So I think that's where they're looking at.
Well, we also understand that her campaign is considering not just who they want to be vice president, but also the kind of policy that they want to pursue. There's been reporting in the last few days, especially in the aftermath of Donald Trump's appearance at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville this weekend, that the Harris campaign is looking to court the crypto industry a bit more for a reset, if you will. We've heard the same from Democrats who support her, like Congressman Wiley Nickel, who's pro-crypto. Do you believe that? And do you believe Donald Trump, who used to call Bitcoin a scam, is actually going to be friendlier toward the industry this time around?
The answer to the second question is yes.
Okay.
Easy, because I don't think this is not one of the things that Trump is married to, right? Trump feels very strongly about immigration and taxes and regulation, okay? That he really, really does. I don't think he cares really one way or the other about crypto. So if you say, well, he's changed policies from last time when he's in office, yeah, and I buy that, and he could be the greatest defender of crypto in the world. I absolutely believe that's possible. To your first question, do I believe when it comes to the Democrats? And here's why. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Republican and they're Democrats. They've got, look, both parties are big parties, right? You only got two parties in a country of 350 million people. They're not going to be monolithic. But within that Democrat Party, on this particular issue, they have a wide variety of issues. Who are the most anti-crypto people in this town? Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders, maybe. Certainly Liz Warren, maybe Dick Durbin, I can't remember.
Gary Gensler?
Yeah, I mean, I forgot about Gary. Yeah, hi, Gary. It's good to see you. Yeah, so I mean, are there Democrats like Wiley Nickel who are strongly pro-crypto? Absolutely. But the big names in the anti-crypto world, the people that really would love to ban it if they got the chance, are Democrats. And I think that's a problem that Kamala Harris is going to have to navigate that Donald Trump doesn't.
So if Donald Trump can have an evolution like that on crypto, does Elon Musk help him find religion on EVs?
You know, the thing on EVs, I think, is probably less the concept of an EV and whether or not we're doing it in what Trump might be able to describe as an America First sort of manner. Are we making them, or is somebody else making them? Go back to the speech that he gave about the car industry in Mexico that got wrongly attributed as that bloodbath speech.
Right, yeah.
I think that was not an anti-EV speech. It was an anti-China speech.
Tesla the version that he'd like to see?
I think if Tesla could make an argument that they've got a way to provide low price, low quality, non-government subsidized electronic vehicles, why would Donald Trump care? But yeah, to your point, because I could see the twinkle in your eye, if you spend $45 million a month or whatever the number is, do you get an open door pass to the White House? The answer is yes, you do.
Wow.
So he was there. I think I bumped into him.
He used to be the gatekeeper at the White House.
Yeah, I've met him half a dozen times. One of the most strangely intelligent men you've ever met in your entire life. I'm not sure I understood a thing that he said, but I'm pretty sure he's a lot smarter than I am.
Well, he didn't get an invite the day GM, Chrysler, Ford, Stellantis were there, did he?
I don't think he needs when you've got the private number. I don't think you need to come in with the rest of the crowd.
Fair enough. Let's not let another month go or whatever. It's been a year.
It's my fault.
It's been a year in political history.
Well, it's amazingly, people all around the world want to talk about our election.
How about that?
I had no idea. I'm huge in Australia, by the way. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right. Well, they have good taste. Let us know what they're asking you next time you're on. Mick Mulvaney, always a treat. Former acting chief of staff, Trump administration, co-founder of the Freedom Caucus. Kaylee, we've looked forward to this conversation for a minute. We'll get him back soon for you here, and we'll assemble our panel coming up next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano holding forth here on the fastest show in politics, and it's only Monday. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. Stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
everyone on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks back in the green now across the board. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ are all advancing. S&P up 19, a gain of just about 0.4%. The Dow, little change, but still higher by 18 points. We've got NASDAQ up 89, a gain of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, however, does remain lower. Right now, the Russell 2000 is down 1.1%. Stocks are higher ahead of major central bank decisions. We've got the Fed decision on Wednesday, a jobs report Friday, and of course, earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. 10-year yield, 4.71%. The 2-year, 4.38%. Gold, spot gold down 0.3%, 23.80 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2.1%, 75.56 per barrel of WTI. The Biden administration announcing today it has purchased 4.65 million barrels of crude oil for the nation's emergency cash as it continues refilling the depleted reserve. McDonald's investors shrugging off the burger chain's first sales drop in 4 years as executives pledge to launch new promotions to help stem the decline in customer visits. McDonald's up now by 4.4%. Rival Restaurant Brands International, which is the parent of Burger King, QSR on the ticker, up by 1%, and Wendy's higher by 1.7%. Recapping, stocks higher, S&P right now up 19, a gain of 0.4%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew as we pay attention to the happenings here in Washington, yes, but also around the world when it comes to politics. And certainly there is a lot of political news coming from Venezuela after the country's presidential election on Sunday. The country's electoral council has just certified that Nicolas Maduro, of course, the incumbent president, won the election yesterday and will have another 6-year term, his third. However, this comes after the opposition cast doubt on the actual results of the election. Exit polling has suggested that Maduro's challenger was actually polling far ahead of him. And Venezuela, of course, earlier this afternoon, Joe, named an opposition leader, Maria Machado, as a key suspect in its investigation into alleged electoral sabotage. And this has taken the notice of many countries around the world, including the U.S. We heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken earlier today saying that he had serious concerns about these results in Venezuela.
Serious concerns. The result does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. That's where we are here. And Maria Corina Machado, who Kaylee mentions, called the result impossible, saying we won. And the whole world knows it. So the question, Kaylee, then becomes about U.S. response. Bloomberg has a really important story just up on the terminal. Eric Martin writing that the U.S. will determine future sanctions on Venezuela based on whether Maduro's government fully releases voting data here. So we're just at the beginning of this story, it seems.
Yeah, and of course, it was in part the U.S.'s own data and the exit polls that it were seeing that were mismatched with what actually came out of the Electoral Council in Venezuela. So this is, to your point, Joe, a story that is certainly far from over. The U.S. not the only country that has a lot of drama around its election these days.
Yeah, how true. Let's talk about the drama in our own. With our signature panel back with us today on the Monday edition of Balance of Power, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, holding forth here as we try to make our way through the Veep stakes in the next week or so. As Kaylee mentioned, they've got it down to 3 here, and we'd love your take on this story and, of course, many of the other cross currents in the campaign. Jeannie, what's your take right now on the big 3 that Bloomberg has highlighted, the governors of Minnesota and Pennsylvania, as well as the senator from Arizona? They each bring their own promise, but in the case of Tim Walz of Minnesota, not a swing state. What do you think Kamala Harris is considering?
You know, I was surprised that he is on the top 3 to a certain extent because I think if you're going to go swing state, you might as well go big with Pennsylvania or Arizona. But of course, they would like to lock up Minnesota. So, and he does have an important record out there. He is well known. He is well liked. He was auditioning this weekend on the Sunday shows. So certainly he is in contention. You know, one thing that I think is worth noting is this drive to go with a white man and leaving aside Gretchen Whitmer, who said she doesn't want to be considered. But Michigan and Whitmer is a really important state. And I keep in the back of my mind wondering, does Kamala Harris surprise everybody by going with Whitmer? She is a very good politician, well-liked in her state. It's a swing state. It's one the Democrats need. And I think to count somebody out due to gender is troubling to me. So I just want to put that out there. But that's what we've been hearing. They're looking for a white man.
Yeah, well, and certainly most of the list does seem to be comprised of that. But Rick, what do you think about Jeannie's point on Governor Whitmer, who herself has said she wants to stay in Michigan in the job she currently has? Is this about America's perhaps lack of readiness to have a female president and vice president, or is this just about someone saying, don't pick me, please?
Yeah, I think that we have to believe Whitmer that she doesn't want to be picked, so she's not on a list anymore. I think she was on an earlier list that had been circulated. I think Gina Raimondo was on another earlier list that had been circulated. I mean, I don't think they're not looking at women. I think they're finding that they have other options, and I think they're clearly looking at targeted states like Arizona, and Pennsylvania. And by the way, Minnesota is not a chip shot for Democrats. At one point in time, right after the convention, the Republicans came out of there saying, we're putting all these states in play. We're going to put Minnesota in play. We're going to, put other states that are sort of, Democrat-leaning states in play. And so to be able to lock up Minnesota, with Tim Walz is not a bad option for the Democrats. It takes another, chess piece off the board. And gets the focus back down to where the Democrats, I think, always wanted it, which is there are only 6 or 7 states that matter. Let's keep our focus on that. We're not looking at Minnesota. We're not looking at New Hampshire, these other border leaners. So, I think they've got the trading range down to where they want it. I think they've done it effectively in a very short period of time. Now you got to pick them, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. They all have different personalities. And I think all of them, though, tend to benefit the ticket. And you think that's kind of obvious, except J.D. Vance. I mean, in retrospect, everyone's in the Republican Party scratching their head going, how in the world did this benefit the ticket?
Huh. It's really interesting you say that, Rick. The Washington Post reporting that in the last 2 days before Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, quote, an array of senators, donors, conservative media personalities, and other supporters, unquote, urged Donald Trump to pick someone else. As we consider childless cat ladies, Rick, where are we on the idea here that Donald Trump may have made a poor choice and buyer's remorse throughout the GOP?
Look, when Don Jr. is calling the shots, this is what you get. And I think that there's such a close link around former President Trump and his family. And I'm sure that the family echo chamber is strong, that J.D. Vance was the guy all along, that he's the one who can continue the march for MAGA. And that may be true on its own, right? Whether MAGA, can expand beyond Donald Trump's, current constituency. Yeah, I don't think anybody believes Vance can do that for them. But look, I mean, there is a portion of the Republican Party, or at least the MAGA party, where he's wildly popular, regardless of some of his cat lady mentions and things like that. So it may be weird, but it is the current state of play within the Republican Party.
Well, we should hear from the senator from Ohio and vice presidential nominee himself, because he was asked about the cat lady thing last night on Fox. Here was how that went down.
Nuns and priests aside, do you agree that there are people who very much love this country and are invested in its future, but they also happen to be childless?
Oh, of course I believe that, Trey. And if you look at the full context of what I said, it's very clear the Democrats have tried to take this thing out of context and blow it out of proportion, which is what they always do, Trey.
Jeannie, blown out of proportion or not, the genie's kind of out of the bottle on this one. Are Democrats going to be able to keep up this line of attack on J.D. Vance, or are they going to have to come up with something else, as we still have 4 months to go and a lot of the enthusiasm and energy we've maybe seen over the last week isn't necessarily sustainable for the next 99 days?
I think there will be more. This was a doozy by J.D. Vance to walk it back. He goes and talks to Trey Gowdy and Megyn Kelly. That's not going to do it. And so he just keeps stepping in it more and more. The reality is, to win this election, Republicans cannot discount suburban women. And that's what his movement into the vice presidential pick has threatened to do with statements like this. I mean, is there a way to come back from it? For sure, but we haven't seen them do this yet. But the reality is, this is all about Donald Trump. Donald Trump not listening to the establishment, talking about how everybody else makes VP picks is nothing new. In my view, he wanted somebody who would do his bidding in a way Mike Pence wouldn't, and that's what he was going for, and hence he turned his back on people that may have made more sense, like Doug Burgum and some of the others on the list, and doubled down with J.D. Vance, which doesn't reach out and get him the votes he needs to win some of these swing states.
All right, Rick and Jeannie, we thank you, as always. Our signature panel with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis will join us as well a bit later on in the later edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Kaylee, that'll be right around the time that Joe Biden is talking about the Supreme Court, which will be potentially newsy, although it's hard to see the path on the proposals that he is putting forward when it comes to term limits and a code of ethics. We've got an interesting headline here we should mention before the news. The House announcing the bipartisan task force to probe Trump shooting. They're being comparing this to a Warren Commission, essentially, following what happened. And the reporting today on the fallout of this assassination attempt is remarkable. The New York Times publishing text messages showing that security officers at the rally identified and talked about Thomas Crooks for more than an hour and a half before he opened fire on the former president.
Yeah, more details continuing to come to light, remembering that this happened just about 2 weeks ago. It was not that long ago, as we all have been living in what feels like warp speed in American politics. And surely more details will come to light as we have this task force looking into the assassination. It's actually being led by Republican Congressman Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania, who, of course, had been pushing, given the proximity of Butler to his district. So we'll have much more on that, of course, throughout the day here on Bloomberg, specifically on Balance of Power. First, though, let's get an update on world and national news with Amy Morris in the 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. President Biden has unveiled a long-awaited proposal for changes at the Supreme Court, calling on Congress to establish term limits and an enforceable ethics code for the court's 9 justices. And he's pressing lawmakers to ratify a constitutional amendment limiting presidential immunity. Democrats hope it will help focus voters as they consider their choices in a tight election. Vice President Kamala Harris zeroing in on a group of potential running mates. She's facing a 2-week dash to make the biggest decision of her presidential bid. People familiar with the process say a short list has emerged, including 3 elected officials with nationwide appeal: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris is expected to make a decision by August 7th. Novak Djokovic dominated rival Rafael Nadal at the start and then held off a comeback attempt to win 6-1, 6-4 at the Paris Summer Games in the second round of the 60th and likely last head-to-head matchup between the 2 tennis greats. France and U.S. each have 14 medals. This is Bloomberg.
9:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. We've got the S&P 500 index climbing 16 points, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 81, now up 0.5. And we have got the Dow in the red, trading lower by 6 points. Little change. The Dow really has been struggling to find direction today. Big tech climbing, small cap slipping after rallying as much as 10% in July. Today, the Russell 2000 index lower right now by 1.3%. 10-year 4.17%, with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.38%. Spot gold, a lower little change, down 0.2%, 23.82 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.9%, 75.70 right now for a barrel of WTI. Well, this is a week that will be bringing a Fed rate decision. We'll also have earnings coming out from major tech companies this week, including Microsoft, Meta Platforms, Apple, and Amazon. Microsoft reporting tomorrow, up now by about 0.9%. Amazon ahead of earnings, up 0.8%. Apple up 0.4%. And Meta Platforms up now by 1.3%. All of those reporting this week. Again, recapping: Dow lower, S&P trading higher. S&P up now by 0.3%, higher by 15 points. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet, thank you, and thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics. Welcome to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. This is Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons, talking politics with our eye on the financial markets as well. A big week for both, Kaylee. We've got a Fed meeting Wednesday. We've got earnings. This is the big one, right? Microsoft, Apple, and the rest reporting this week, with a lot of questions about the future of our economy and the future of this presidential campaign. And so it makes it easy to miss some of the headlines internationally here, with the news today from Venezuela, but also Israel, as the Biden administration warns Israel that if it continues to target Hezbollah and, in fact, opens a new war with them, this could spin out of control, Kaylee. We've discussed this before with Hagar Shamali, who's going to join us in a moment here. The question about a much wider conflict in the Middle East is very real right now.
Yeah, especially after the events of this weekend, a rocket attack that notably Hezbollah has actually not claimed responsibility for. It has denied this, which is an unusual move for the group. But it ended up killing 12 young people, and Netanyahu has vowed a harsh response. The question is, how will the harshness of that response actually be calibrated, especially considering the input of allies like the United States? So for more, let's turn to Hagar Shamali, of course, formerly of the National Security Council, where she was director for Syria and Lebanon, but now CEO and founder of Greenwich Media Strategies. Hagar, always great to have you here on Balance of Power. Obviously, this is a region of the world that you know incredibly well. It is worth pointing out that this did happen in what is many internationally recognized as Syrian territory. This isn't necessarily somewhere where you would expect Hezbollah to strike. So what is your read on what exactly happened here and what you think Israel might do next?
Well, from what we understand from both the Israelis, but also, by the way, from the U.S. government, that said that all signs indicate that Hezbollah is the one that launched these rockets. There were a barrage of about 30 rockets, 30 missiles that hit that area that you talked about, that soccer field, where nearly a dozen children were killed. And since then, Israel has promised a retaliation. The defense minister, the prime minister have promised that Hezbollah would pay a very heavy price. We've seen strikes along the border since then, but that is not the response to this. So we are waiting now. Everybody in Lebanon is nervous. The airports have been, all airlines have been shut, have been suspended to and from Lebanon, from Beirut, because everybody is anxiously waiting the step that Israel will take. And I anticipate a very hard response, very strong response from Israel, probably against weapons depots in the south of Lebanon, key infrastructure like roads and bridges, again in the south, and also wherever they may know that Hezbollah leaders are.
What happens if Israel does target Hezbollah in Beirut? Hagar, what would the U.S. posture be?
Well, Beirut is a little bit different, and not a lot of people are expecting a strike in Beirut. And let me explain why. The reason is that neither side actually wants a war. And I know I've said this a number of times, and it may seem odd since you've seen these strikes go on between both sides for the last 9 months. But neither side actually wants a war. Otherwise, you would have seen them by now in a full-scale war. It's just that the pressure continues to mount more and more. And when that pressure mounts, and when you have strikes that go on back and forth, you always have the risk of miscalculation. And I would argue that the strike that happened against this soccer field. And I believe, like I said, I believe that when the U.S. comes out and says that it's Hezbollah, I know what it's like, what standard they have to meet to say something like that publicly. So when Hezbollah makes a strike like that, whether or not it was a mistake is a major miscalculation. And Israel's going to respond, but it might respond the way, for example, that it did against the port of Hodeidah in Yemen, when after the Houthis sent a drone that killed an Israeli citizen in Tel Aviv, or the way it responded after Iran's assault of 300 missiles and drones against Israel. Israel responded in a way to respond in a strong and loud fashion to send a message that they need to stop once and for all, or to stop at least for the time being. And then on the other side, they kind of sit back so that it doesn't escalate further. Beirut would escalate things to another level, though. It would cause something reminiscent of the 2006 war you saw between Israel and Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and of course, this isn't happening in a vacuum, Hagar. This is actually happening as Israeli negotiators are in Rome together with other mediators from the U.S. and Qatar and Egypt, looking toward a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We have just gotten, within the last 15 minutes or so, a headline out of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Hamas leaders are obstructing the hostage deal, that they're adding new demands. But how do you view